The story begins with a boy secretly watching a group of goblins gathered around a campfire. But just as he shifts his foot, a twig snaps, alerting the goblins to his presence. Without hesitation, he bolts, but also the goblins hot on his ass. As he runs, a sly smile creeps across his face because this is all part of his plan. The goblins then obliviously soon tumble into a pitfall trap he'd cleverly set up earlier. The boy finally reveals his face, breathing a sigh of relief, thinking it was a close call. He's thankful for his foresight in preparing the trap, and reflects on the fact that for now, he's surviving in this world all on his own. The story then flashes back to the day when he was transported to another world. We find our protagonist Haruka, during a school lunch break, reading manga alone as usual. He admits that he's a loner but by choice. He prefers his own company, convinced that others would only disrupt his reading. Haruka describes how his classmates have split into various cliques. The gals, the delinquents, the group around the class rep, the jocks, and the nerds. Everyone else he lumps into the others category. He makes it clear that he doesn't fit into any of these groups, and he's fine with that. With that thought, he tries to take a nap, but suddenly the classroom begins glowing, and everyone is stunned. Haruka, however, quickly spots a magic circle forming on the floor, and far from panicking, he gets excited at the idea of being teleported to another world. But that excitement quickly fades as he realizes it's going to be a pain in the ass. Deciding to avoid the whole situation, he makes a break for the door in an attempt to escape the circle. But predictably, the classroom doors won't budge. Unwilling to give up, Haruka frantically throws anything he can at the door in hopes of breaking it, but to no avail. In a final effort, he climbs up into the ceiling, thinking he's finally outsmarted the magic circle. He takes a deep breath, feeling safe at last. But that relief is short-lived. Another magic circle appears above him, and before he knows it, he's whisked away to the cliched white void. Haruka finds himself standing in an empty space, waiting for the usual appearance of a king, princess, or god. But instead of any grand figure, he notices an old man, sitting there looking just as lonely as him. The old-timer god then rushes toward Haruka, clearly panicked. As he mumbles, Haruka pieces together that this flustered old man is the god of another world. The god explains that Haruka's classmates have already been transported to this new world, and he's shocked to realize he missed one of them. Haruka bursts out laughing, mocking the god for not even noticing him hiding in the ceiling hatch. The god, embarrassed and clearly frustrated, hurriedly tells Haruka to pick a skill so he can transport him too. Haruka is then presented with a massive list of skills, only to realize that all the cheat skills have been snatched up by his classmate. He sighs in annoyance as he sifts through the remaining scrap. One skill, Dice, catches his eye. It allows him to add a point to any stat if he rolls 2 6s. He chuckles at the absurdity but moves on to check the combat skills. Of course, only Cane Mastery is left, a skill he deems utterly pathetic. He moves on to the starting gear and is greeted with the pitiful sight of skills called Villager, a set, and some contact lenses. Sighing again, he takes a look at the magical spells, only to see mundane options like temperature control, packing, weight management, and movement spells. His skill choices are no better: general health and walking. As for job titles, his options are just as bleak: shut in and neat. Finally, his list of traits includes corporate proactiveness, the utterly useless master of none, and a ridiculous blockhead trait that feels like an insult tailored just for him. Frustrated beyond belief, Haruka grabs the god and shakes him violently, yelling that he won't even make it past the starting village with this pathetic lineup. He berates the god, demanding he do his job properly and offer a better variety of skills and abilities. Flustered and desperate to get rid of the stubborn loner, the god finally relents, granting Haruka all the remaining skills and shoving him into the new world. The scene then shifts, and we find Haruka alone in a forest. Before him lies the sad-looking villager set. He sighs once more and rummages through the accompanying bag, and is surprised to discover that it has an unlimited storage capacity. Inside he finds some basic gear, a wooden stick, contact lenses, and the rest of the leftover junk. Resigned to his fate, he dons the gear, trying to get into the whole otherworld vibe, and then he decides to check his stats. But as Haruka attempts to open his stats window, a pop-up appears asking him to use his dice skill. Curious, he rolls the dice and gets M on both of them. Confused, he ponders what M could mean. Unable to figure it out at first, he's prompted to choose which stat to apply the points to. Knowing raw stats won't guarantee survival in this world, he decides to dump everything into his luck. When the stats window finally opens, he's shocked to see that his luck stat has maxed out. So it dawns on him that the M stands for max. Feeling a glimmer of hope, he checks out the rest of his stats, and unsurprisingly he sees all the worthless skills he'd acquired. Amidst them, he discovers 2 additional skills: One is Loner, which ensures he can only live alone and prevents him from ever forming a party. The other is Servitude, a skill that lets him command others, albeit ironically since no one would want to follow a loner. Haruka then frustratedly grumbles that his chances of getting a harem in this world just went up in smoke thanks to these garbage skills. Then, as he ponders the absence of his classmates, he realizes it doesn't matter since he can't form a party anyway. So with that shit situation, he decides to move on, focusing on setting up a base of operations instead. As he explores the dense forest, Haruka grumbles about the poor visibility due to the overwhelming number of trees. Then he remembers the contact lenses he stashed in his bag. He puts them on, and immediately, his vision sharpens, revealing the names of all the plants and objects around him. It turns out his contact lenses grant him the appraisal skill, and suddenly, the entire world feels more accessible. Excited by this newfound power, Haruka stumbles upon some edible mushrooms with the added benefit of drawing out latent abilities. He gleefully stuffs them into his bag, knowing his magical bag can hold an unlimited amount of items. Feeling more confident, Haruka realizes that with this skill, he can locate anything he needs. Then shortly after he finds a river, fills his water bottle, and quenches his thirst. He then stumbles upon a cave and stops at the entrance, praying that no monsters are lurking inside. After a moment, he heads in. To his relief, it's pretty spacious and comfortable. He figures living here might actually be a good idea, especially since he's got tents and lanterns. He grabs the dry leaves and twigs he picked up earlier and uses his temperature control magic to start a fire. He hopes this will keep the beasts away. Before crashing for the night, he checks his stats. Turns out, his temperature magic has leveled up, unlocking fire magic. He's also picked up new skills like clairvoyant sight, presence detection, and enemy tracking. He figures it's probably because he's been on edge, watching for monsters. As he drifts off, he can't help but wonder what he'll do if anything shows up. He knocks out. When he wakes up the next day, he's relieved to find no issues. He figures it's thanks to his monster-repelling items and the fact that his shut-in job title seems to protect his space. Feeling hungry, he starts a fire with his freshly unlocked fire magic and whips up some mushrooms and jerky with a sprinkle of seasoning. Then as he digs in, he's surprised at how decent it tastes. He also realizes how clutch the villager asset is: frying pan, knives, everything. While looking over his gear, he starts to question whether Villager A was really just a villager or a survivalist. After his meal, he sits back and starts thinking about what he's going to do next. He then continues exploring the forest, thinking that the cave will serve as his base of operations for now, and the next on his agenda is setting up some proper safety measures. Then along the way, he gathers some herbs and more mushrooms, but quickly realizes that monsters are going to be his biggest headache. Just as he thinks that, he senses some presences nearby, and he sees it's two goblins. Panic sets in, but then he figures these guys are small fry, though their stats are higher than he expected. Haruka wonders if he stands a chance, but he knows that if he wants to keep exploring, there's no way around this fight. He decides to wrap his cane using his packing ability, which coats objects in magic and gives them various boosts, and surprisingly, it works pretty well. With newfound confidence, Haruka resolves to work hard and surpass his classmates who scored cheat skills. He charges at the goblins, his glowing cane in hand, and easily takes down the first one. The second goblin attacks, but its moves are too predictable, and Haruka dodges them without much trouble, and with a quick burst of magic from his cane, he finishes the second one off. By the time evening rolls around, Haruka is cleaning up at the river, feeling proud that he survived his first battle, and he reflects that today was a good day. He then exhaustedly heads back to the cave, eats some mushrooms, and notices a wooden club he picked up from the goblins. He quickly dismisses it, thinking it's useless, it's too short in range and a bit too heavy. His trusty cane is way more efficient. Checking his stats, he's surprised to see that he leveled up just by whacking a couple of goblins, but he's not complaining. He also discovers he's gained a new skill called Magic Infusion and notices that his calisthenics level has gone up. By day 3, Haruka is already sick of eating mushrooms every damn day. He craves some meat and even laughs to himself, imagining how his class rep would definitely scold him for complaining. He then begrudgingly swallows the mushrooms, and then decides to check out the Magic Infusion skill he picked up the other day. Turns out, it cloaks his body with magic and enhances it. And on top of that, it empowers his magical defense and physical control. He then also notices that his appraisal skill leveled up to level 2. However, instead of being thrilled, he's confused. It now shows question marks on some of the things he tries to appraise, so he annoyedly wonders if it's more of a downgrade than an upgrade. Shrugging it off, Haruka heads into the forest, intending to practice some magic. but his focus is soon shattered when he spots yet another mushroom. Disappointed, he laments the lack of meat and sarcastically wonders why meat doesn't grow on trees. Then he remembers he's supposed to be practicing magic, not foraging. He activates his magic infusion skill again and starts running around the forest, feeling surprisingly light on his feet. His dexterity is off the charts. While exploring, he encounters some goblins that are a bit stronger than the ones he faced earlier, but they're still no match. He defeats them more easily than yesterday, and the confidence kicks in. He starts thinking he could probably take on 3 goblins at once now. But just as he's getting cocky, he spots 3 muscular goblins up ahead. His confidence evaporates instantly, and he ducks for cover, realizing he's outmatched. Haruka ducks and hides immediately. He then starts slipping away quietly, fully aware he's not ready for that shit. Over the next few days, he sticks to a routine, hunting goblins during the day and studying magic by night. On day 5, Haruka manages to take down a goblin with a single strike, and he also spends some time renovating his cave house, adding a gate and some not-so-fancy furniture to make it more livable. Later that night, he finally gets lucky and hunts down a rabbit for some much-needed meat. After catching the damn thing, he's pretty pumped, thinking he'll actually get to eat something other than mushrooms for once. But just as he's about to celebrate, he senses someone approaching. To his annoyance, it's the group of gals from his class. Not wanting to get mixed up with their drama, he ducks out of sight. But then he senses the damn delinquents are nearby too, and he is definitely not in the mood to deal with them either. Using his clairvoyance, Haruka scans the area and realizes the entire class is here, including the class reps group. He doesn't want to get involved with the other group's shit, but for a second, he thinks maybe he should at least say hi to the class rep, given that they've known each other since grade school. But then he snaps out of it. He's not about to start acting like a simp. In fact, he's enjoying the freedom of being completely isolated, and for the first time, no one telling him what to do, no drama, no distraction. He can live exactly how he wants. And with that thought, Haruka decides he's better off conquering this world on his own, without his classmates dragging him down to their shit. He suddenly ducks into a bush, trying to stay hidden as the delinquents approach. One of them, suspicious, says he's sure he heard something and starts closing in on the bushes where Haruka is hiding. As he checks inside, all he finds is the bunny, so he and the others move on. Haruka lets out a sigh of relief they didn't spot him. Still, curiosity gets the better of him, and he decides to tail them, hoping to figure out if they're up to something. As he listens in, he quickly realizes the delinquents are just having an embarrassingly perverse conversation about the girls' melon measurements. Haruka is disappointed, having expected to learn something useful. With no real rules or consequences in this world, he's a bit worried about what these idiots might do to the girls. But he reassures himself, the class rep will probably handle it, she always does. Just as he's about to tune out, Haruka overhears the delinquents plotting to use some poor nerd named Tanaka for his abilities to do whatever they want. That's when Haruka knows they're up to no good. But getting involved? That would require actual social interaction. And let's face it, Haruka is completely against that. He retreats back to his cave and starts grilling some mushrooms, trying to shake off the whole thing. But then he notices something that hits him like a truck. His loner skill just leveled up. Even his status board now officially recognizes him as a loner. It probably leveled because he avoided his classmates all day. But still, it's not the worst thing that could have happened. Honestly, he wouldn't mind leveling up more, considering his overall level is stuck at a measly 3. The real issue though is his 2 skills, Master of None and Dummy skills. He has no clue how to level them up or what they even do. Master of None seems straightforward. He'll be decent at most things, but never truly master anything. As for dummy skills, Haruka figures it might have something to do with puppets, but he's not really sure. So he decides to stop thinking about it for now and just focus on eating his dinner. But he still wishes he had some damn meat. Haruka calls it a night and tries to drift off to sleep. But a loud commotion outside makes that impossible, so he reluctantly gets up to see what's going on. He expects to find the usual delinquents causing trouble, but to his surprise, it's not them this time, it's the nerds. They're in the middle of fighting a group of goblins, but they're clearly struggling. Haruka considers stepping in to help, but then he checks their stats. To his disbelief, their skills are leagues above his, and they're all level 16 while he's still stuck at level 3. He figures they've got this under control, so he turns to leave. But just as he's about to walk away, Haruka spots 2 goblins sneaking up behind the nerds. Given how much trouble they're already having, an attack from behind would wipe them out for sure. Haruka hesitates, still unsure if he should get involved. But then he remembers the time the nerds shared their holographic Charizard with him back in the day. That memory is enough to push him over the edge. These guys are worth saving. So without another thought, Haruka charges out of the bushes, stick in hand, and one-shots both goblins in a single swing. The nerds, wide-eyed and stunned, turn to see Haruka standing there. He asks if they're okay, and while they're physically fine, they're shocked to see Haruka out here in the wild. After some awkward reacquainting, the nerds thank him profusely, but Haruka finds it difficult to hold a conversation after all. It's been ages since he's had a proper chat with anyone. Eventually, Haruka leads them back to his cave, and the nerds are blown away by the place. Despite it being a cave, the interior is cozy and well designed. Haruka explains that he picked up some earth magic and crafting skills to remodel the place. But the nerds still think it's incredible that he did it all on his own. He offers them drinks and asks what they were doing in the woods so late at night. That's when the mood shifts. The nerds go quiet, exchanging uneasy glances, and after a few moments of silence, they finally admit that they're on the run from the rest of the class. It all started when the class got teleported into this new world. At first, everyone was just shocked by what had happened, completely blindsided. But soon reality hit, they were stuck here and panic set in. Some were calmer about it though. The popular girls seemed more annoyed than scared, as if this whole situation was just ruining their day. The delinquents were trying to figure things out, but their lack of Isekai knowledge wasn't helping. Meanwhile, the nerds were thriving. This was their moment. The class rep was just as confused as everyone else. But she had enough common sense to know that balling in the middle of an unknown forest was a sure way to attract predators and get everyone killed. So she immediately tried to get the class to calm down. But of course it was too late. A group of goblins had already caught wind of them. The class rep, who usually has everything under control, was completely out of her depth when it came to monsters and started to freak out. Naturally, the rest of the class followed suit. Even the delinquents were shaking it as we expected. The nerds, however, knew someone had to take charge, so they activated their skills and got to work taking down the goblins. Even the gym bros joined in. Before long, the goblins were defeated, but the class still wasn't safe. The class rep, pulling herself together, got everyone's attention and made it clear they needed to find somewhere safe to stay before they got ambushed again. A little while later, they set up camp by the river. The nerds, with all their vast Isekai knowledge, took it upon themselves to teach everyone the basics of survival in this world. At first, things seemed to be going smoothly. The class divided duties evenly, and everyone was pitching in. But then, out of nowhere, the popular girls decided that they are not going to do any damn work anymore. The class rep tried to reason with them, saying all they had to do was help set up the tents, but the girls couldn't be bothered. And of course, since the popular girls weren't doing anything, the delinquents thought, why should we do any shit? And they decided to be lazy too. This left the class rep and the nerds doing all the work, setting up camp, gathering supplies, handling every single task. On top of that, the nerds took on the added responsibility of dealing with all the monsters that kept trying to attack the camp. It was a heavy load, but they knew they had to do it for their own survival too. Back in the White Room, the nerds saw two particularly disturbing skills get chosen. One was a charm spell that granted control over people, and the other was a puppeteer skill, which basically did the same thing. The nerds knew one of the delinquents had picked up the puppeteer skill, so they realized they needed to level up fast if they wanted any chance of defending themselves against them. At night, the delinquents would go out hunting monsters too, but only to grind levels so they could unlock their twisted skills. While eavesdropping on them one evening, the nerds overheard something chilling. The delinquents were already planning to use their newfound power to turn the girls into their slaves once they were strong enough. The nerds knew they had to act, so they rushed to warn the class rep. Unfortunately, just a few days later, the delinquents had leveled up enough to start using their skills. Unluckily, the class rep just happened to be nearby, so they set their sights on making her their first victim. But before they could make their move, the nerds jumped them. The delinquents were taken down, and their skills were sealed away, making sure they wouldn't be able to hurt anyone. The powerless delinquents were no longer a threat, and as expected, the girls were furious when they learned what had been planned. The delinquents were immediately kicked out of camp. That should have been the end of it. But the delinquents, being the petty jerks they were, decided to take revenge. Later that night, while the nerds were away, the delinquents launched a sneak attack not to take control, but purely to cause chaos, so they set the entire camp on fire, burning everything to the ground. By the time the nerds got back, they were devastated. Everything they'd worked so hard to build was gone. To make matters worse, the popular girls somehow twisted the situation, blaming the nerds for provoking the delinquents and causing the destruction. Thankfully, the class rep stepped in, reminding everyone that the nerds were the only reason they'd survived this long. While the nerds appreciated her defending them, they'd had enough. Staying in a camp full of ungrateful people wasn't worth it anymore, and so they decided to leave and go on the run. After hearing the nerds' whole story, Haruka genuinely feels bad for them, so he decides to host a mushroom feast that night. Surprisingly, he finds himself actually enjoying the company, which is a rare thing for him. But the next day, the nerds have to leave. They're planning to head downstream to find a village and start fresh as adventurers. Before they go, they invite Haruka to join them, seeing him as a friend. While Haruka does consider them friends, he declines because he's convinced that his trash skills would only slow them down. Even so, he's a bit uneasy about the situation back at the class camp, mainly because the class rep, the only other person in class he respects, is still there. He decides to check out the camp and see what's going on. On his way, he randomly encounters a kobold. It bites him a few times like a mad dog, but he eventually manages to kill it and continues his journey. By the time night falls, Haruka reaches the riverside where the class camp should have been, but to his surprise, the place is completely deserted. Figuring they must have moved, he uses one of his detection skills to track footprints and follows the trail until he eventually stumbles upon the popular girls. Of all the people in his class, Haruka despises dealing with them the most, so he immediately tries to turn around and head home. But it's too late, they've already started chasing after him. Normally, Haruka would have no problem outrunning them, but he freezes in place when he hears them say the word please. In all the years he's known them, please has never once been in their vocabulary. Something serious must have happened to make them this desperate. So against his better judgment, he decides to hear them out. The first thing they ask is if he knows where the nerds went. Haruka hesitates, suspecting they just want to berate the nerds some more. But to his surprise, the girls actually want to apologize. They've come to realize just how much the nerds were doing for them all along, and they genuinely want to make amends for the way they treated them. But by now, the nerds are long gone, and there's no way the girls could ever catch up to them. For starters, they can't even navigate the woods alone, let alone defend themselves against the monsters lurking about. Haruka asks them how they plan to find the nerds if they can't even handle basic survival, and then he asks them if they even have the resolve to do whatever it takes to apologize. But the girls just break down in tears, knowing they wouldn't last a day out there on their own, so they beg Haruka to teach them how to survive. Haruka, completely blindsided by their sudden desperation, agrees before he can even process what he's saying. And that's when Haruka's subjugate ability kicks in, and without warning the girls become his subservient followers. So their blank stares are now fixed on him, and that terrifies. Then whenever Haruka gets into a fight, they jump in to finish off the monsters, and then present the magic crystals to him like eager puppies waiting for approval. Haruka isn't happy with how this is turning out. He didn't sign up for this, and now the whole situation feels wrong. One of the girls has a small injury on her arm, so Haruka feels responsible and hands her a healing potion he made, expecting her to use it on herself, but instead she uses it on him. He's getting increasingly frustrated. Everything they do is only for his benefit now, and he's starting to get sick of it. What's worse, he can't figure out how to undo the subjugate ability, and if he runs into the class rep, how on earth is he going to explain this? Just as he's stressing over how to release the girls from his control, the class rep appears. She tries talking to him, but Haruka is too wrapped up in his thoughts about breaking the servitude to notice her. It's only when she shouts in his ear that he snaps back to reality, realizing she's standing right next to him. Meanwhile, the delinquents are still scheming, planning to carry out their twisted ambitions with the girls, so eventually they've decided to deal with anyone who might stand in their way first. Then we see Haruka panicking because he's clueless about what to say to the class rep, and come to think of it, he doesn't even know her name. They've been in the same class since elementary school, and she's always been nice to him, so she can't believe this idiot never bothered to learn her name. A few moments later, the rest of the girls from class show up. Of course, everyone except the popular girls is following the class rep's orders. Speaking of those popular girls, the class rep spots them standing behind Haruka, but they look like they're sharing a single brain cell at the moment, so she figures Haruka must have done something to them. He'd love to say he's innocent, but the ugly truth is, even if he didn't mean to, his skill somehow turned them into his servants, and now he's stuck with this mess. He tries to explain without sounding like the villain, but none of the girls believe him, so Haruka just gives up trying to clear his name and starts to walk off. Too bad for him. The class rep won't let him go that easily, so she forces him to stay while she checks on Shimazaki to see if she's okay. Fortunately for him, a little shaking is all it took to snap her out of it, and Shimazaki reassures the class rep that she's fine, which gives the rep some relief. Haruka, on the other hand, thinks this is his cue to finally leave, but of course the class rep still wants to know how the whole subjugation thing happened in the first place, so she's not letting Haruka go this easy. Then, while the girls are chatting, Haruka is left alone by a tree, and since he's got nothing better to do, he decides to practice his magic. He figures he'll try expanding his house once he gets home. So he starts experimenting, trying to figure out how to make a basement. But being Haruka, he messes it up and ends up burying himself in the ground from the neck down. So he stuck like that and sat waiting until the class rep found him. She's completely shocked to see him buried in the dirt, especially since she only asked him to wait a few minutes. But hey, boredom makes people do dumb stuff. She then goes over Haruka's head and pulls him out of the dirt. And once he's free, she apologizes for not trusting him. Apparently, Shimazaki told her that Haruka was just trying to help everyone. Haruka doesn't remember offering to help everyone, but the class rep and the other girls are already thanking him, so he just rolls with it. Then, with everything settled, Haruka is ready to head home. But the girls start getting mad because he's about to leave them stranded in the wilderness without offering any help. That's when the class rep catches on Haruka just mentioned having a home, so she immediately asks him about it. And Haruka casually explains that he had some spare time and well, just built a house. The class rep is floored because she can't believe this guy managed to build an entire house by himself, while they've been struggling to manage a camp. The other girls are just as impressed, so they huddle together. Holding a quick meeting, the class rep asks Haruka how many people his house can accommodate. Haruka, trying to think it through, says it could fit about 200 people, though they'd have to move some furniture around and maybe drain the indoor pool. The class rep, green with envy at how well Haruka's doing for himself, reluctantly asks if she and the other girls can stay the night since they're all kind of homeless at the moment. Haruka freaks out internally. It's one thing to let a few guys crash at your place, but this is a whole class full of girls. So the thought of that shit makes him feel hot like hell. But still, he manages to calm himself down, and once he's composed, Haruka leads them all toward his house. And thanks to all the time he's spent wandering through these woods, Haruka is way better at navigating than the girls, and one of his skills even gives him helpful tips, keeping him headed in the right direction. Eventually, Haruka makes it back to his house with the girls in tow, and after catching their breath, they're absolutely floored by the sight. It's been ages since they've had a proper roof over their heads or enjoyed the luxury of indoor plumbing. Then the moment Haruka mentions there's a bath over that way, the girls practically stampede toward it, stripping down right in front of him. Haruka's brain short circuits. There's no way he can survive a whole night under the same roof with them. So thinking quickly, he sets up a tent outside to get some much-needed alone time and prepares to sleep. But just when he's about to settle in, the class rep walks into his tent. There's something she wants to talk about. First, she thanks him for all his help because without him, she wouldn't have had a clue what to do. After the nerds bailed, the gym bros also left, leaving the girls to fend for themselves. It's been rough, but now that they've had a bath and a decent meal, the girls are finally in high spirits again. Even so, the class rep admits she feels like a failure as their representative because she couldn't fix the situation on her own. But Haruka thinks she's being way too hard on herself because up until now, she's been the one protecting and keeping the girls together. She admits that may be true, but they got lucky not running into any monsters. If they had, she would have been powerless to protect the class, unlike the nerds. But Haruka speaks again and points out that she's not being fair to herself because the nerds have basically spent their whole lives preparing for something like this, so of course they could handle it. But for her, this is the first time she's ever even heard of Isekai. So considering all things she's done, it's a damn good job. Hearing that the class rep feels a lot better, though she still can't help but compare her accomplishments to Haruka's. After all, he built a fully functioning house in just a week. Then she wishes him a good night and heads back inside. But with everything that's happened today, there's no way Haruka's getting any sleep in this hot tonight. Early the next morning, Haruka is woken up by one of the girls sitting outside his tent, telling him to get up because breakfast is ready. He is still half asleep, so it takes him a moment to realize what's happening. But when it hits him, he starts freaking out a little and protests by saying that he wants to sleep in a little longer. The girl, however, isn't having it and climbs on top of him, trying to coax him out of bed. Haruka defeatedly gives in and asks what's for breakfast. He expects the usual, mushroom soup with a side of even more mushroom. But to his surprise, breakfast is actually fish today. So excited, he accidentally headbutts the girl in his enthusiasm. She's a little hurt, but Haruka's too thrilled to care because finally he gets to eat something other than mushrooms, and he's loving every bite. The class rep, confused by his excitement, asks why he's so worked up about eating fish when he's been living next to the river this whole time. Haruka admits that while that's true, he absolutely sucks at fishing, which is why he's never managed to catch any. Seeing how the girls seem so accustomed to eating fish, Haruka asks how they manage to catch them so easily. The class rep agrees to show him and takes Haruka to the river. along with one of the girls who has a lightning magic skill. Her method is simple but effective. She just electrocutes the water until the fish stop being alive. Haruka is amazed and begs her to do it again, though she's reluctant. She agrees since Haruka has been helping out. She summons another ball of lightning, but before she can throw it in the river, Haruka quickly grabs it and seals it with his packing skill. He tosses it into the water himself and catches some fish, but on top of that, he gains lightning magic as well, meaning he won't need lightning girl's help anymore. The class rep then confusedly asks what he just did, so Haruka explains that by using his packing skill on a particular element, he gains that type of magic. It's probably a result of all the different skills he has, which is definitely useful, but in Haruka's mind, he's still stuck with a bunch of useless abilities. Then, while the other girls splash around in the river, Haruka sits with the class rep and asks what she and the others plan to do next. The class rep admits the details are still a bit unclear, but their goal is to head for the nearest village and try to catch up with the nerds. However, she adds they'll need to level up if they're going to make it out of this forest on their own, so Haruka, trying to be helpful, offers to train them before they leave. Then, not long after, all the girls are gathered in the forest for Haruka's impromptu training camp. But before they start, Haruka asks what their current levels are. When they tell him they're all above level 15, Haruka feels an immediate pang of depression because he's still stuck at level 7 after all this time in the forest. So he begins to wonder if they even need his help at all. Then, to test their abilities, he sets them up to fight a group of kobolds to see how they handle themselves. The girls think this will be a walk in the park, since the kobolds are only level 6. But a few moments later, all of them had their butts handed to them, and they were knocked out on the ground. Turns out, none of them expected the kobolds to actually fight back. So bruised and humiliated, they retreat to regroup and strategize. But oddly enough, the strategy meeting ends up taking place inside Haruka's magic tent. Thanks to its ability to expand, they all fit comfortably. But Haruka still has no idea why they chose his damn tent for this. After some deliberation, the girls head back out confident they've got it this time. Haruka is glad they're feeling motivated, but in the back of his mind, he's not convinced they'll win round 2 either. Then once they leave, the girl who woke him up that morning approaches him, looking a bit sheepish. She apologizes for her behavior earlier. Apparently, she was deliberately getting close to him to see if he'd try to take advantage of the situation. She admits she didn't trust him at first, but now, after he's given them shelter, food, and even offered to train them, she feels like she can trust him, so she adds that she'll be back tomorrow to wake him up with breakfast again. Haruka, feeling relieved that she trusts him now, smiles and says he's looking forward to tomorrow. However, since he still doesn't know her name, he decides he'll just call her Fish Girl for now. The next morning, Haruka is thrilled to get another fish from Fish Girl, but then overhears the other girls talking about going back to fight the kobolds for revenge. But before they can rush off, the class rep calls them back, reminding them that they'll definitely lose again if they don't train first. So she suggests they start by fighting goblins instead. However, when the girls actually face off against the goblins, it's a complete disaster. But despite this setback, some of the girls are still convinced they're ready for a kobold rematch, while others start mysteriously coming down with sudden illnesses to avoid fighting anymore. Haruka doesn't have high hopes for this, and he's fully prepared to jump in if things go south. But to his surprise, the girls actually learned from their mistakes with the goblins and managed to work together to defeat the kobolds. The class rep congratulates them on their victory, and Haruka feels a wave of relief because this means the girls can handle themselves now, and he can finally go back to his peaceful life as a loner. But at least that's what he thinks, because the class rep walks over and thanks him for agreeing to come with them to the nearest village. Haruka knows for a fact that he never said he'd join them, but class rep is pretty insistent, so in the end, he caves and agrees to go with her. A little while later, everyone's packed up and ready to leave the forest. Haruka reminds them they don't know what dangers they might run into out there, so they should stay on guard. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, one of the boys from their class is seen frantically running for his life. He makes the mistake of looking back and trips over a rock, only to find himself cornered by his attacker, and with no escape, he's strangled to death in the instant. Later, we see Haruka wandering through the forest with the girls, and he's thinking, alright, gotta keep these girls safe from those delinquents. But first they need to get out of the woods. Then boom, they run into an orc. The girls dive for cover, and Haruka steps up to fight. He declares like a total show-off that he's about to teach them a thing or two about fighting. He charges at the orc, and the monster swings. But surprisingly, it can't find him after the attack. Turns out, Haruka's hiding behind a tree, laughing at the orc's sheer stupidity. He recalls that the nerds told him orcs are tough against physical attacks, but can be taken down with enough magic. So he checks his abilities and spots something called Grand Magic. He discovers that Grand Magic includes fire, water, earth, and wind spells. Turns out, he got most of them from his packing skill, everything except fire magic. He thinks to himself, even the dumbest skills can come in handy sometimes. Right then, the orc finds him. It swings again, but Haruka dodges like it's nothing. He smacks it on the head, tells it to calm the hell down, but instead of chilling out, the orc just up and dies. Haruka's left blinking in shock because physical attacks weren't supposed to work on it. Meanwhile, the girls give him death stares because that didn't teach them shit about fighting. Next, they run into another orc. This time, Haruka busts out some fire magic from his temperature skill, and he takes the monster out in one hit. Haruka's shocked again, and the girls, now thoroughly annoyed, point out that they're not going to learn squat if he keeps nuking the monsters in a single blow. The scene then shifts to the girls having dinner at night while Haruka sets up traps around their campsite to catch any monsters that might try to attack. He's convinced his tent will help keep the monsters away and also alert him to any danger. So with the traps and the tent, he figures it should be enough to look after the girls. He then glances at the map he got from his appraisal skill and notices the river curves ahead, and he starts thinking about which route they should take from here on. But suddenly his perception skill kicks in, and he senses something nearby. Thinking it could be monsters, he goes to check it out only to find humans instead. He assumes they're the delinquents at first, but it turns out to be the jocks, so Haruka is relieved and glad it's just them, and we see that the class rep sees them talking to Haruka from a distance. Haruka then asks the jocks why they're here, jokingly wondering if they're after the girls too. The jocks deny it, saying they're not here for the girls, they came looking for him. Haruka, in his typical snarky way, wonders if they're into boys now, but the jocks, clearly irritated, assure him they're not. Then when Haruka asks why they're hiding from the girls, the jocks reveal that they don't trust anyone at the moment. They remind Haruka of a skill they learned about that's even more dangerous than puppeteer or charm, so Haruka quickly realizes they're talking about the hijack skill. The jocks explain that while the delinquents made a big fuss about the puppeteer and charm skills, they never mentioned hijack, which means they don't have it. But someone else might. Sensing an opportunity, Haruka decides to mess with the jocks a bit by pretending he has the hijack skill. But the jocks don't seem fazed, they say they'd be fine even if he did. Then they ask if he really has it, and Haruka admits he doesn't but reveals that he learned the subjugate skill instead. The jocks freak out, thinking it's even worse, but they reassure themselves that it's probably okay since Haruka's a loner and will always stay that way. But Haruka unbotheredly points out that there's nothing wrong with being a loner. The jocks then say their only reason for coming was to warn him about the hijack skill, then ask him to be careful. They plan to keep an eye on the delinquents from now on and ask Haruka to apologize to the class rep and the girls for them. He agrees, and they leave completely unaware that the class rep overheard the entire conversation. The next day, Haruka tells the girls they're heading back into the forest and asks them to gear up. They all nod, eager and ready to fight, and Haruka can't help but wonder if they ate something weird for breakfast because they're way too pumped. As he steps away from the group, the class rep pulls him aside, asking if they can talk in private. Once alone, she tries to bring up what the jocks had told him. Haruka suddenly remembers they wanted him to apologize for them, so he does. But that's not what the class rep is here to talk about. She looks nervous, hesitant to say what's really on her mind. Seeing her uneasy behavior, Haruka immediately pieces it together. She's the one with the hijack skill. The class rep is shocked, asking how he figured it out since this was supposed to be a secret between her and the nerds. Haruka smirks, saying it only took him one look to figure it out. He can't believe the jocks were too stupid to notice. The class rep, still puzzled, asks why he helped her if he knew. She wonders if he's not afraid of her, considering what hijack can do. But Haruka unbotheredly tells her there's no reason for him to be afraid. The class rep then explains that hijack is a skill that steals someone's abilities by taking their life, something that would terrify anyone. But Haruka shrugs it off, repeating that he's not scared. He's sure the nerds felt the same way too. They locked away the puppeteer and charm skills, but they left hers alone, which told him everything he needed to know. She's confused by his words, but Haruka clarifies the nerds were actually relieved that she was the one who ended up with the hijack skill. He says he feels the same, and upon hearing this, the class rep breaks down in tears of relief and joy. Haruka, ever the tease, tells her she's been crying too much lately, to which she snaps back that it's all his fault. Laughing, he bolts, pretending to run away in fear of being blamed for her tears. Later, we see the students taking a break after traveling for a while, and Haruka brings some juice for everyone. but of course he jokes about charging them for it. The class rep, not amused, gets angry and tells him to stop trying to make a profit off his friends. Laughing it off, they all continue their journey. Haruka notes that they're ahead of schedule, but still it looks like they'll be stuck camping again tonight. He spots then a river and thinks it's the perfect opportunity to try something, so he asks the class rep and the others to handle things here while he goes ahead to scout. The class rep offers to go with him, but he tells her to stay put and keep an eye on things, then takes off ahead. After getting some distance away, Haruka uses his magic wrap skill to cloak himself in magic and also uses his weight magic to make himself lighter. With his reduced weight, he starts jumping from one tree to another like some kind of ninja, thinking to himself how handy these skills are. But of course in his excitement, he jumps way too high and ends up gawking at the view right before plummeting down with no way to cushion his fall. He crashes face first into the ground, barely surviving thanks to the magic wrap protecting him. Later that night, he limps back to camp all beat up. The class rep, immediately suspicious, asks how scouting could leave him looking like he just lost a fight. Haruka sheepishly admits that he got a little carried away, jumped too high, and ended up face planting. The class rep, irritated at his stupidity, gets angry with him, so in a lame attempt to calm her down, he offers her some berries, but she's not having it and storms off, leaving him standing there. The next day, they make great progress thanks to Haruka's scouting despite his earlier mishap. Along the way, they face some fun and scary situations, but they manage to get through all of them pretty easily. After more traveling, they finally make it out of the forest. The girls are thrilled to see the open plains ahead, thinking the town might be close now. Haruka, however, starts to get more cautious, knowing they're more exposed out in the open. He notices the hills in front of them are blocking his view, so he checks his stats and discovers he's got a new skill called Air Walk. Without hesitation, he uses it and literally starts walking on air. The class rep, understandably shocked, yells up at him, but Haruka's too caught up testing out his new skill to even hear her. After a while, Haruka finally notices the class rep calling out to him, and she asks if he's going to be okay being so high up. He casually replies that it's all good, and mentions he's just checking the area to make sure everything's safe. Scanning the surroundings, he spots some people being attacked by monsters. He reports this back to the class rep, and immediately she insists that they have to help. But Haruka, ever the cynic, points out that just because they're getting attacked by monsters doesn't automatically mean they're good people, and he knows how the girls tend to be too trusting. The class rep wants to send their fastest runner to help those people, but Haruka tells her it's pointless, they won't make it in time. He raises the possibility that they could be bandits, saying it might be safer to just let things play out, but of course the class rep is having none of that. She firmly states that if they're bad guys, she'll handle them, but if they're innocent, she wants to help. Haruka rolls his eyes internally, knowing she'd say something like that, so he agrees to go save them himself, leaving the girls surprised. Realizing he can't run fast enough to make it in time, Haruka thinks about what to do. Magic wrap and weight magic won't be enough this time, so he decides to try something new, using magic wrap to enhance his physical abilities and weight magic to make himself lighter. He adds wind magic to launch himself into the sky, but unfortunately the class rep gets caught up in the gust as well. As Haruka soars through the air, he kicks off with his new air walk skill, propelling himself forward. He's impressed, thinking that with these skills, he can go anywhere he wants. But suddenly, he realizes the class rep is hanging on to him and asks what the heck she's doing there. She explains that she got swept up in his wind magic and tells him to stop, they're already at their destination. But Haruka, of course, casually drops the bomb that he hasn't quite figured out how to stop. They crash straight into the monsters attacking the people, accidentally defeating them in the process. Haruka, picking himself up, asks the people if they're alright. One of them, still in shock, responds that they should be the ones asking him that question. Still, they thank him for saving them, not entirely sure how they survived that chaotic rescue. The leader of the group then introduces himself as Oftir, and his friend follows up with his name Godek. Haruka is relieved that they don't have any language barriers to deal with. He then asks why they were getting attacked by monsters. So they explain that merchants have been getting ambushed in the area recently, and the Adventurers Guild put out a quest to wipe out the monster. Thinking it would be easy money, they took the job but quickly realized they were way out of their league. Haruka then spots a massive wolf nearby and learns that it's a creature called the Big Green Wolf. Oftir then tells his team to gather whatever's left of their stuff, but they're clearly frustrated about failing the mission. With nothing better to do until the girls arrive, Haruka decides to cook up some mushrooms for the adventurers. As they eat, they realize they're being served stamina caps, a rare and valuable find. They're shocked that Haruka's sharing something so precious, and Haruka, in typical fashion, is surprised these mushrooms are even rare. He learns that stamina caps not only restore energy but also help heal wounds. Eventually, the class rep wakes up, and not long after, the rest of the girls catch up. They're stunned when they see a real elf and a knight, immediately swarming the adventurers like they're models on a runway. The adventurers, now back on their feet, guide everyone toward the town. After some time, Amiwi finally comes into view, so the girls ecstatically sprint toward the town, and the whole group enters together. The scene then shifts to the delinquents, who are busy leveling up their abilities. Feeling confident after their training, they decide they're finally ready to go after the girls. But Tanaka suggests they target the group of nerds first, since they can force them to unlock the puppeteer and charm skills. So the delinquents love the idea and quickly agree, unaware that the jocks have been eavesdropping on their entire plan. Back in Amui Town, the girls are practically bouncing through the streets, hyped up by all the wonders civilization has to offer. They're gushing over everything, but class rep quickly reminds them that they're flat broke and have a mountain of stuff still left to do. She rushes off to round up the excited girls while Haruka watches with a grin, thinking to himself that now that he's gotten everyone safely to the city, they shouldn't need him anymore. That means he can finally slip back into his peaceful, carefree learner lifestyle. Meanwhile, class rep is struggling to keep the girls under control, and in desperation she asks Haruka to lend a hand. But Haruka's already kicked back, chilling in the shade because his work is done, or so he thinks. Class rep frustratedly gets it. He's relieved to be in the city, but there's still so much left to handle, so she blows her whistle, rallying the girls into order, and lays out her plan. First, they'll head to the Adventurers Guild to sell all the loot they've gathered on their journey. Then, they'll register with the guild and rent an inn for the night. While they're at it, they'll also ask around to see if anyone's spotted the nerds lately. It's a solid plan, but the popular girls immediately take offense, annoyed that class rep is treating the nerds like some side quest. She quickly apologizes, but Haruka can't resist poking fun at the popular girls for caring so much about the nerds in the first place. A little while later, the group makes their way to the Adventurers Guild, and it's way more intimidating than Haruka expected. The second they step inside, they're hit with hostile stares, and Haruka's gut is screaming at him to back out. Before he can even think about it, Off-Tier tells him that the guild master wants to meet him. Haruka figures it is not a great sign, so he tells the class rep to get the girls registered while he heads upstairs to see what the guild master wants. Upstairs, the vibe is even worse. Everyone looks scarier, and Haruka's nerves are shot. At the end of the room, Godek is waiting and leads him to the guild master's office. Haruka walks in, bracing for the worst as he comes face to face with a menacing-looking guy. But to his surprise, the guild master just wanted to thank him for saving Off-Tier and his party. So all that worry was for nothing. After that's done, Haruka heads back downstairs and spots a counter, figuring that's where you go to sell magic stones, so he walks up and asks the attendant. She confirms, so Haruka casually dumps a pile of stones out of his bag. There's a lot more where that came from, but before he can pull out the rest, the poor attendant tells him to stop. Apparently, he's just dropped 2 days worth of overtime on her desk, so she asks him to come back tomorrow so she can finish appraising the ones he's already handed over. Haruka's not in a rush, so he agrees, and besides, the girls have all finished registering as adventurers, which means it's his turn. Haruka heads confidently into the registration room to get assessed, but his smug grin doesn't last long. The guild worker hits him with the bad news. He's too weak to become an adventurer. Turns out, you need to be at least level 10 to register, and even then you'd have to join a party to qualify. If Haruka wants to register as a solo adventurer, he needs to be at least level 20, but he's only level 9, and thanks to his loner skill, he can't form a party anyway, so it looks like he's stuck being unemployed for a while. Later that night, class rep leads everyone to the lodging the guild arranged for them. But when they finally get there, Haruka starts to freak out because it looks a lot like a love hotel. He calms down after realizing it isn't, and everyone says goodnight before heading off to their separate rooms. The next morning, they all meet up at a diner for breakfast, and class rep excitedly tells them that the town is supposed to be really safe, so they're free to explore and do whatever they want. The girls are thrilled and start planning a shopping trip for later, and seeing that they can handle themselves from here on out, Haruka decides he'll head back into the woods as soon as he gets paid for his crystals. After breakfast, Haruka heads to the guild to check if his magic stones have been appraised, but when he arrives, he's met with sincere apologies from the staff. Turns out, they don't have enough money on hand to pay him all at once. The guild master then steps out personally to apologize, asking Haruka if he'd be willing to accept payment in installment. Haruka laid back as usual, says he's fine with it, and the guild master breathes a sigh of relief, grateful for Haruka's understanding. In the meantime, the guild master hands over what they've already appraised, and it's 8 million ire in that bag. And from what Haruka and class rep have figured out since arriving in Amui, the currency's value is pretty much the same as back on Earth, which means Haruka just hit the jackpot. The payout is massive because Haruka brought in more F-rank stones than the guild has ever seen, and on top of that, he took down some green wolves, which bumped up the reward even more. Sitting on a small fortune, Haruka decides to do some shopping before heading back to the forest, so Godek chimes in, saying he knows a spot Haruka might want to check out. Naturally, Haruka assumes he's being led to an adult establishment, but much to his disappointment, Godek takes him to a rundown weapon shop instead. The shop specializes in rare gear collected from dungeons, and since Haruka is a bit of an odd case, Godek figured this would be the perfect place for him to gear up. Sure, the place looks like it might fall apart any second, but Godek swears the quality is top-notch. Haruka, trusting Godek's judgment, decides to give it a shot. The equipment might look weird, but the effects they offer are next level, so Haruka ends up spending the entire day browsing and buying as much as he can afford. Just as he's about to wrap up, he spots a necklace that catches his eye. It looks pretty decent, but when he uses his appraisal skill, the only description he gets is "Fit 7. It's the same cryptic message he got when appraising his villager set earlier, so he curiously asks the shopkeeper if he knows what "Fit 7 inches is supposed to mean. The shopkeeper explains that the necklace allows the wearer to combine the effects of up to 7 different items and use them all at once. So Haruka's eyes light up because this sounds incredibly useful. If the effect also applies to his villager set, it means he can stack even more effects onto his gear. He's about to start sorting through items for the best combinations. But right then class rep bursts in, yelling at him for staying out so late. Haruka, realizing he's been here for hours, admits he still has a lot more he wants to try out. As he's holding one of the items, it suddenly reacts, and before he can process what's happening, all the items in front of him fuse into one. The shopkeeper, understandably furious, reminds Haruka he hasn't paid for any of it yet, and all that gear had cost him well over 10 million ire to acquire. Haruka starts panicking, knowing he doesn't have that kind of money, so Godek steps in, pleading with the shopkeeper to accept Haruka's 8 million as a compromise. The next day, Haruka is sulking because he blew all his cash and is now flat broke. He'd love to head out and gather more crystals, but the problem is, you're not allowed to leave town to hunt monsters unless you're a registered adventurer. And of course, he's already tried sneaking out with some of the girls, but class rep caught him and gave him another earful. Now he's come up with the perfect plan to escape unnoticed. His villager cloak got combined with an invisibility cloak, so he figures this is his ticket to slip out of the city without anyone realizing. He sneaks past class rep and the girls, feeling a bit guilty for not saying goodbye, but he knows she'd definitely stop him if she found out. Haruka manages to sneak out of the lodging successfully, but once he's outside, he makes the classic mistake of taking off his invisibility cloak, thinking he's in the clear. So as he tries to jump over the wall, a couple of the girls who are hanging around outside spot him, so Haruka gets panicky and loses his footing, and in a moment of pure bad luck, he slams his family future against the wall. He crashes to the ground groaning, and yells at the girls for scaring him like that. They just look at him confused and say that they were only asking where he was going, and why he was jumping the wall in the first place. Recognizing them as part of the athletic group, Haruka quickly notices one of them is missing. Using his perception skill, he locates her, and to his horror, sees that she's about to strip naked right in the middle of the street. So Haruka, along with the athletic girls, rush over to stop her, and thankfully they manage to intervene before she's fully undressed. But by then, Haruka's grand escape plans have been completely wrecked. The next day, all the girls are preparing to head out to complete a quest for the guild. Haruka, still determined to tag along, asks if they'll let him join, but class rep immediately shuts him down, because she doesn't trust him anymore after his little stunt trying to ditch them the day before. She then assures him they'll be back soon, and Haruka nods, saying he'll wait. But the moment class rep and the others leave, Haruka's grin returns because he has no intention of sitting around. He's learned from yesterday's mess, so this time he keeps his cloak on until he's safely outside the city gates. And once he's in the clear, he takes it off. Now he's officially out of the city, with nothing standing between him and his cozy house in the forest. But as Haruka is running, he notices a bunch of destroyed buildings off in the distance. Normally this would scream side quest, but Haruka couldn't care less because he just wants to get back to his house, so he completely ignores it. He also spots a horde of goblins, and it's a perfect opportunity for some quick experience points if he kills them, but once again he brushes it off because his priority is the forest, not leveling up right now. Then just when he thinks he's in the clear, he stumbles upon a carriage being attacked by bandits. It's hard to ignore, especially with the people inside crying out for help. Haruka debates for a second, but ultimately decides to keep moving because this isn't his problem. But of course, as soon as he tries to leave, the bandits target him, so Haruka gets annoyed and tries to reason with them, explaining that he doesn't want to get involved. The bandits, however, don't care and keep coming at him, leaving Haruka no choice but to act. So with a single fire spell, he absolutely roasts them. The staff he's holding is from one of the weird item combinations he got stuck with, but turns out it's way more powerful than he expected. As the bandits struggle back to their feet, Haruka, still trying to avoid unnecessary drama, warns them to leave him alone if they know what's good for them. The bandits, impressed by his magic, assume that's his only strength and decide to rush him in close combat. But it's a big mistake because Haruka takes them down effortlessly, knocking each one out with a single strike. The bandits are shocked because they can't believe they're getting wrecked by one kid, so they are desperate for answers and ask him what his job is. That question hits a nerve because Haruka's still unemployed, and it stings. The then bandits check his status, trying to figure out what they're up against. But when they see he's only level 9, they get cocky again, convinced they can beat him if they use their weapon skills. Weapon skills only unlock at level 20, so Haruka doesn't have any, and from what he knows, weapon skills are really dangerous, so he starts to feel a little nervous. The then bandits start using their weapon skills, and while they're definitely dangerous, they keep shouting out their attacks before they strike. So Haruka is unimpressed and easily dodges every single one of their moves until they all collapse from exhaustion. But just when he thinks it's over, he notices a girl approaching him from behind, and he groans internally because this has unskippable side quest written all over it. The girl introduces herself as Muriel, from a noble family, and she wants to thank Haruka for helping her. But then she hesitates, remembering that he did try to ignore her at first, so she's unsure if she should be grateful. Still, despite his reluctance, she appreciates that he eventually stepped in to help, and she has a favor to ask. Her father is the lord of a nearby city, and she's hoping Haruka will accompany her back, since she's worried about her safety. Haruka isn't interested at first, but the mention of a reward piques his interest, so he reluctantly agrees to escort her. As they travel, Muriel makes small talk, asking where he was coming from when they met. This prompts Haruka to launch into a rant about the awful city he just left. He complains about how the guild didn't have enough money to pay him, refused to register him as an adventurer, and how the city wouldn't even let him leave without a permit. As Haruka vents, Muriel's eyes widen because she realizes he's talking about Amui, the very city her father runs. So she starts crying, devastated by how little Haruka thinks of her home. Haruka feels a pang of regret, realizing Muriel is the daughter of the Lord of Amui, meaning the carriage he's escorting is headed right back to the place he was so happy to leave. So now he deeply regrets agreeing to this little side quest. Meanwhile, back in the forest, tensions are running high as the gym bros square off against the delinquents because the gym bros aren't about to let the delinquents hurt any of the girls, while the delinquent leader has no qualms about killing them if necessary. But just as the leader raises his sword to strike, he's abruptly stabbed through the back. The jocks and the delinquents are both stunned by what they've just witnessed, but as the remaining delinquents attempt to avenge their fallen friend, the first one to step up also gets taken down with a quick stab. The last two then decide to attack together, hoping to even the odds, but the unknown attacker is just as quick to handle them. The jocks are now fully aware they're outclassed, so they try to run, but the assailant is faster, appearing in front of them with a menacingly slow advance. Meanwhile, Haruka has just been dragged back to town by Muriel, and let's just say, he's not thrilled. He didn't want to come, but Muriel started tearing up, so he went along just to keep the peace. When they reach the Lord's house, Muriel leaves him alone for a moment, and he glances around. Sure, it's a fancy place, but it has nothing to do with him, so he heads straight for the door to leave. But before he makes his exit, Muriel comes back upset. He's trying to bail on her after she specifically asked him to wait while she changed. She then insists he wait a bit longer because she still has something special planned to thank him. Haruka doesn't really want to, but seeing how insistent she is, he gives in. At first he was totally against staying, but when Muriel finally shows him the feast she prepared, his attitude takes a complete flip. This whole setup is her way of showing appreciation, but soon enough she's annoyed again because Haruka is absolutely ignoring her. too busy stuffing his face with food. As he digs in, Muriel tells one of her maids to bring out the rest of Haruka's reward. They bring him a pouch of money, and while he nods in acknowledgement, he barely seems excited. For a bonus, Muriel even noticed Haruka wasn't registered in the city, so she went ahead and got a custom ID card made for him, giving him free reign to enter and leave as he pleases. It's a thoughtful gift. But Haruka, now totally lost in his dessert, is barely paying attention at this point. The next day, class rep and the rest of the girls immediately start grilling Haruka about what happened last night. Haruka tells them he was just summoned to the local lord's mansion, and while class rep can tell he's not lying, she's baffled why the lord would even want to see him in the first place. Haruka keeps his story vague, not wanting to reveal that he'd met Muriel during a botched escape attempt. Eventually, the girls drop it and decide to head out on a mission. But before they leave, class rep firmly reminds Haruka he's not allowed to leave town. This time though, Haruka seems unusually agreeable, but that's only because he knows he'll have no trouble leaving once they're gone. With his custom ID, he's finally free to slip out of town without any hassle. But before he bails, he has a few things to take care of. He buys new gear, feasts on some good food, and leaves a note for class rep, hoping it'll keep her from blowing up when she realizes he's gone. In the note, he says he's heading back to the forest to check on the jocks. It's mostly just an excuse, but he is actually a bit worried about those muscleheads. After showing his ID, he's cleared to leave town, and this time he's determined not to get sidetracked by any annoying detours. Before long, he's back in the woods, and he's relieved to see everything just as he left it. Eager to get home, he lets his guard down for a moment, and that's when an orc tries to sneak up and bash him over the head. Luckily, Haruka's stats are way too high for an attack like that to do anything, so he swats the orc down with a single hit from his staff. He's puzzled though, since orcs don't usually roam this part of the forest. Even stranger, he finds a fresh human blood trail nearby. And since he knows the nerds are too strong to lose to anything in these woods, he figures it must belong to one of the jocks. He begins tracking the blood trail and eventually finds the jocks, bloody and beaten, sprawled under a tree. At first he thinks they're dead, but as he gets closer he notices they're still breathing. So without any hesitation, he dumps every healing potion in his inventory over them until they finally regain consciousness. The jocks begin explaining what happened, and while Haruka had assumed they were ambushed by the delinquents, he's shocked to learn all the delinquents are actually dead. Haruka quickly asks if the nerds were attacked too, but the jocks have no idea. They don't think so, since the nerds left the forest ages ago. They can see Haruka's intent to hunt down whoever did this, so they warn him. Tanaka is insanely powerful now. They barely lasted seconds against him, and to make things worse, he took all their overpowered weapons, making him even deadlier. They suspect Tanaka has been planning this from the moment their class got transported here, and they're not sure he can be stopped, but they're pretty certain about one thing: his next target. Among all the remaining students, they think Tanaka's most likely going after class rep, since she has the hijack skill. Haruka realizes it's possible Tanaka would want her for her unique ability, but only class rep, the nerds, and he himself knew about it, so he can't help but wonder how Tanaka got his hands on that information. The jocks were able to piece it together because Tanaka kept pestering them for class rep's location. When they couldn't tell him what he wanted, he beat them within an inch of their lives. They didn't want to lead him to her, so instead they dragged themselves to Haruka's area, hoping he'd find them before they bled out. Now with Haruka's strength, they feel confident they can win if they all fight together, but Haruka isn't so sure he even wants to get wrapped up in a battle like this. He came here to avoid all side quests, yet if class rep is in danger, he's got no choice but to step up. Still, he makes it crystal clear to the jocks this is a fight he's handling alone. The jocks try to talk him out of it, pointing out how risky it is to go solo against someone as powerful as Tanaka. But when they see the steely look in Haruka's eyes, they realize there's no changing his mind, so they reluctantly agree to let him go alone. Haruka tells them to head into town and catch up with the other girls, and while they're at it, they really ought to apologize to class rep for ditching the group earlier. As the jocks walk away, Haruka considers that having them fight alongside him might have helped, but he knows the risk is too high. If Tanaka overpowers them, no one would be left to protect the girls, so the safest option is for him to tackle this alone, making sure he's fully prepared for the clash with Tanaka. Meanwhile, back at the village, class rep is beside herself with worry after realizing Haruka has left the city. The other girls reassure her, promising that he'll definitely return. Back in the forest, Haruka thinks through his game plan against Tanaka, because the jocks warned him that Tanaka's weapon skills are unbelievably powerful. Even the no-name bandits had terrifying moves. But Haruka discovered one thing: once a weapon skill animation starts, it can't be stopped. If Tanaka attempts one, Haruka's determined to exploit that split-second opening. but to pull it off he'll need a new skill, which means he'll have to level up. Just then he notices a horde of goblins, lured in by the jock's blood. They're high level, so he takes them down for experience. But it's still not enough to level up. So he frustratedly mutters that he'd need something tougher for real progress. And almost as if summoned by his words, a Goblin King appears, and Haruka steels himself for battle. The Goblin King is a beast. Its attacks are incredibly fast, and one blow could be fatal. Haruka has to dodge at the last possible moment, and there's no way to counterattack without risking a hit. Forced to switch strategies, he uses his warp skill to blend several of his other skills into a new powerful one. And with this new skill, he blazes past the Goblin King and takes it out instantly. He's thrilled that his skill combo worked out so perfectly, but just as he's celebrating, he senses a terrifying presence behind him. So he instinctively braces himself, knowing that another fight is just beginning. This monster is a Goblin Emperor, and it's already at level 50, while Haruka's still stuck at level 9, so Haruka realizes there's no way he can beat this beast in a straight fight. His only option is to try his combined skill again, so he activates it and charges straight at the Goblin Emperor. The second he's within range, Haruka strikes, but his special skills don't even scratch it. The Goblin Emperor rises as if nothing happened, then launches a barrage of attacks at Haruka with mind-blowing speed. It's obvious this thing is using weapon skills because its hits are way too powerful for anything else. Haruka desperately searches for an opening in the Emperor's attack animations, waiting for his moment to counter. He then spots it and strikes the goblin in the chest, sending it flying back. But just as he thinks he's made progress, the goblin starts healing itself right on the spot. Haruka realizes that regular attacks won't cut it in this fight, so he'll need to come up with another combined skill. But before he can think, the Goblin Emperor strikes back with a vicious weapon skill, launching powerful slashes his way. Haruka barely manages to block, but the blow leaves him battered. At this rate, his chances of winning aren't looking good, but he knows he can't back down, not if he wants to be strong enough to protect his friend. So he drags himself back up and charges at the Goblin Emperor in one last desperate attempt to end it. And by the time dawn breaks, Haruka is the last one standing. Thanks to his relentless effort, he's gained 2 levels. Now that he has reached level 11, Haruka heads back home to check his status window. Just as he'd hoped, his new level has unlocked several new skills, though he's unsure if they'll be enough to take Tanaka in a fight. But with his made-up skill, at least he can strike in a split second to exploit any weapon skill animation. And now all he can do is hope that things turn out in his favor. Later that evening outside Haruka's house, Tanaka shows up and Haruka has been expecting him. Haruka remembers how Tanaka played the victim when the jocks bullied him after they first arrived, but now he sees it was all an act for revenge. As Tanaka and Haruka face off, the girls return to Omui after a long day of adventuring. On their way back, they notice a couple of guys slumped outside the walls. They quickly realize it's the jocks and are relieved to see them until they notice they're in rough shape. Class rep recalls that Haruka had left a note saying he was going to check on the jocks, so she asks them if they know where he is, and they tell her that Haruka's currently fighting in the woods to protect them all. Back in the woods, Tanaka is disappointed to see Haruka's the only one here because he'd been hoping for class rep instead, and he even went through the trouble of stirring up the delinquents to split the class. Haruka realizes Tanaka's been orchestrating everything from the start, and now Tanaka's ready to kill anyone who gets in his way to get what he wants. Tanaka sneers at Haruka, not seeing him as much of a threat, and turns to leave intent on finding class rep and stealing her hijack skill. But Haruka, even if he doesn't particularly care for all his classmates, can't let this happen. So he raises his staff to Tanaka's neck, coldly declaring that he will not pass. Tanaka gets irritated that someone he considers a nobody like Haruka dares to stand in his way, but he's more than willing to kill him if that's what it takes to see his plans through. Tanaka then fires up a shockwave and launches himself straight at Haruka, forcing Haruka to throw up his hands in defense. Before he'd left the White Room, Tanaka had noticed there were only trash skills left on the skill board, so even if he's not exactly sure what abilities Haruka's got, Tanaka's confident he's got the upper hand against someone like him. Tanaka then uses his magic to summon and hurl several rocks at Haruka. But just as Haruka tries to defend himself again, Tanaka activates a metal skill to mess with his movements, freezing him in place for a split second, leaving him barely able to dodge out of the way before the rocks nearly crush him. Even though Haruka regains his mobility, he's way slower than usual thanks to Tanaka's skill. Tanaka's all set to exploit this weakness, so he starts spawning crystal spikes beneath Haruka's feet. Haruka manages to dodge the spikes by jumping from side to side, but it's obvious he won't be able to keep this up much longer. Tanaka gives him credit for lasting this long, but before finishing him off, he has one burning question. He demands to know when Haruka first started suspecting he was up to something shady. And Haruka reveals he'd been wary from the start because there had to be some reason why Tanaka was hanging around the delinquents back then. Tanaka is impressed by Haruka's instincts, but Haruka's got a question of his own. He wants to know when Tanaka started plotting his underhanded scheme. Tanaka, proud and unfazed, declares he's been planning this from the very beginning. Sure, he admits it was a setback when class rep snagged the hijack skill instead of him, but once he got his metal skill, the one that lets him mess with others' movements, he knew he could still come out on top if he played his cards right. But just then Tanaka conjures magical roots that shoot up and bind Haruka to the ground, and with Haruka immobilized, Tanaka hurls a massive fireball, intending to reduce him to ash. Tanaka's convinced this should be enough to end Haruka, but to his shock, Haruka absorbs the magic and emerges unscathed. Haruka wasn't even sure that trick would work when he tried it, but he's thrilled that his magic-absorbing vine fused into his staff came through. Then while Tanaka stands there frozen in surprise, Haruka seizes the moment, charging at him. But just before Haruka can land a critical blow, Tanaka summons a sword and blocks the attack. Sure, he's surprised Haruka absorbed his fire magic, but magic isn't his only weapon, and he actually has so many weapons he can barely decide which one he'll use to kill Haruka. Deciding to have some fun, he plans to use them all, aiming to shred Haruka to pieces as he charges in for another attack. Haruka defends himself as best as he can, but with Tanaka switching up attack patterns and weapon types, it's impossible to keep up. So eventually Haruka slips, leaving him open to a brutal strike that sends him sprawling into a cluster of bushes. And by the time he scrambles to his feet, Tanaka lands a vicious slash that sends him skidding across the forest floor. Haruka survives the blow, but he's winded and struggling to stand. Tanaka soon approaches, standing over him with a smug grin. Haruka hates to admit it, but he might actually be in serious trouble. Tanaka's barrage of attack patterns, combined with a range of skills, is overwhelming, so Haruka starts piecing things together, and he figures that Tanaka must have copied all their classmates' abilities with the copycat skill. Tanaka is amused that Haruka figured it out so fast, but when he confirms it, Haruka realizes that Tanaka is after class rep next because he wants her hijack skill to steal every original skill, and with all those overpowered abilities, he'll become unstoppable. Tanaka doesn't give him another moment to think, and he swings aside this time, knocking Haruka back with the sheer force of his strike. Haruka can barely hold on and decides to launch his own desperate attack to catch Tanaka off guard. But as he strikes, he realizes too late that Tanaka had tricked him with illusion magic. Then, after realizing that nothing he tries is working, Haruka appears to give up, standing still as Tanaka charges at him with a sword. But at the last moment, he sidesteps with a smirk and whispers in Tanaka's ear that he's figured out his secret. And from that moment on, Tanaka finds himself struggling to land a single hit on Haruka. So Haruka explains that he was letting Tanaka unleash everything in his arsenal to discover a weakness. And while dodging each strike, he noticed that Tanaka never used the same skill more than twice. And from that he deduced there must be a limit to how many times Tanaka can use each copied skill. So if Haruka can keep dodging, Tanaka will eventually run out of skills. Tanaka feels a wave of panic, realizing Haruka has exposed his biggest weakness. But still he's convinced he can finish Haruka off before his skill reserve runs dry. So he lunges again, but Haruka is now quick enough to leap over him and counterattack. Haruka has adapted to Tanaka's speed, and no matter how many new attacks he tries, Haruka isn't caught off guard anymore. Then Haruka seizes his chance, charging in for the finishing blow. But just before he can strike, Tanaka fires a laser beam, forcing Haruka to pull back. Even with his secret exposed, Tanaka is still a powerful foe, and he's not to be underestimated. Tanaka's breathing grows heavy as exhaustion starts to show. Yet he stands tall, shouting that he'll never let himself be defeated by someone like Haruka. Though he's at a disadvantage, he's got one last trick up his sleeve. He darts wildly around the forest, moving unpredictably to confuse Haruka, who struggles to keep up. And by the time Haruka finally realizes what Tanaka is planning, it's too late because Tanaka has already activated his death skill, and as it takes effect Haruka collapses to the ground, and Tanaka stands over him laughing victoriously that he has finally won the battle. Tanaka then starts giving Haruka reluctant credit, admitting that he was forced to burn through nearly all his saved skills in the fight. But he sneers, saying it doesn't matter because once he kills off the remaining classmates and claims the hijack skill, he'll have all the permanent abilities he wants. He then kicks Haruka's head for good measure and turns to walk away. But as he's leaving, Haruka calls after him, calmly pointing out that it's pretty rude to step on someone's head without an apology. Tanaka stops in his tracks, stunned that Haruka is even alive since the death skill has a 100% success rate on anyone above level 11. But Haruka explains he has a skill that grants him resistance to negative status effects. Plus his luck stat is maxed out thanks to rolling double M's when he first arrived, and that luck likely countered the death skill. And for falling to the ground, it was just for the dramatic effect because he thought it'd be funny. Tanaka can't see the funny side in that shit show and demands to know how Haruka can even move at all, considering he'd used his metal skill to lock Haruka's movements from the beginning of the battle. Haruka admits the metal skill is a real pain in the ass, and technically he hasn't been able to move his body. Instead, he's been using his puppet skill to control himself from the outside the entire time, and he proudly declares that it may seem all the skills Haruka acquired are trash to anyone, but with him it will become unstoppable. Frustrated and refusing to believe he's losing to someone with junk skills, Tanaka lunges at Haruka and starts slashing wildly. But Haruka unfazed deflects each blow with ease and warns Tanaka he'll run out of skills if he keeps it up. Ignoring the warning, Tanaka goes for a desperate overhead slash, but as expected Haruka emerges completely unharmed, and then he calmly tells him that his reign of terror is over. Tanaka can't understand how it's possible for him to lose, especially after perfectly calculating everything to ensure his victory. In his mind, 1 + 1 should always equal 2, meaning Haruka should never have been able to grow this powerful. Haruka just laughs, pointing out that Tanaka's rigid way of thinking is naive, and sure the rules of math made sense back on Earth, but here the laws of physics don't apply. Then with a flashback, we see that Tanaka had always been the genius back in school, he endlessly bored out of his mind and surrounded by what he saw as his dim-witted classmates. He always longed for something to break the monotony, and his wish was granted when their class got summoned to this new world. Then the moment he saw the skill board, he ran his calculations, quickly deciding that the most thrilling path was to kill off all his classmates and steal their skills for himself. And no matter how psychopathic that made him sound, he wasn't about to let a nobody like Haruka derail his grand plan. Tanaka then keeps attacking with what's left of his skills, but Haruka can tell he's running low on options, so he readies himself to take advantage of that and deliver the final blow. But just as he's about to strike, he's stabbed from behind, and with a grin Tanaka reveals that he can control weapons remotely as well. And with Haruka bleeding and on his knees, Tanaka begins slashing at him, claiming victory is finally within reach. But then, in an unexpected twist, Haruka shit slaps him with his staff, knocking Tanaka back. All of Tanaka's elaborate plans and calculations couldn't save him here, and of course his copy skill might be overpowered, but it made him overconfident, so he never had to learn adaptability like Haruka did, and that's why he's going to lose. Then, in a desperate move, Tanaka attempts to stab Haruka with his sword skill, but Haruka anticipates it and counters with a made-up skill of his own, fatally wounding Tanaka, who collapses lifelessly. Despite Haruka's victory, he's badly wounded. So as the adrenaline fades, the full force of his injuries hits him, leaving him drained and on the verge of passing out. But just before he crumples to the ground, he's caught by the nerds. Haruka is relieved to see them, so he can't help but joke that it would have been nice if they'd shown up a bit sooner to help. They may have missed the battle, but at least now they're here to get him back on his feet. Haruka's grateful for the help, though he's curious how they even knew he was out here. They explain that class rep found them right as they were leaving the dungeon and told them about Haruka's battle, so they couldn't just stand by and let him handle it alone. And without hesitation, they headed into the woods to back him up. In the end, they all make it back to the city, where the girls are waiting by the gate to greet Haruka. They're visibly worried and announce that they've prepared a feast in his honor. Haruka, though, feels awkward under all the attention. Then the leader of the gym bros approaches, and in true bro fashion, he doesn't need words, just a solid dap to celebrate Haruka's victory. With that done, the girls suggest they all head back to the inn, as the baths are ready and everyone could use a good scrub down, but Haruka doesn't get much choice as they drag him along. Meanwhile, the popular girls stay behind to apologize to the nerds, and it's a surprise since the nerds never expected these girls to show humility. The popular girls admit they were wrong for how they'd treated the nerds and genuinely thank them for all they did for the group. Then we see that with everyone making amends, Haruka feels that all the loose ends have been nicely tied up, and he starts to feel like there's no reason for him to stick around, so he starts quietly slipping away to return to his peaceful life in the woods. But before he can escape, class rep catches him in the act and furiously demands to know where he thinks he's going, reminding him of how worried she was he might not make it back. and now that he's finally here, he's trying to sneak off again. Haruka sheepishly apologizes, and class rep relents, saying it's fine as long as he doesn't try to vanish on them again. Besides, this time all the girls will be keeping an eye on him, so there's no way in hell he's getting away that easily. The next day, Haruka wakes up after a bizarre dream and drags himself downstairs, where he's greeted by the nerd squad. From the looks of things, they're gearing up to dive back into the dungeon, and Haruka can't help but be a little curious because they've been dungeon crawling non-stop lately. So when he asks why, the nerds spill that they're hunting for a rare item, the kind you can only find in the dungeon. Naturally, Haruka wants to know what's so special about it, and their answer nearly makes him facepalm. Apparently the item is a harem magnet ring, which is their ticket to finally scoring a harem. They've been stuck here for almost a month, and not a single baddie has even glanced their way, so they claim that this ring will fix all that. Then, as they head off on their grand quest, Haruka muses over the ring. Sure, it sounds cool, but he doesn't need one because all he wants is to go back to his peaceful and loner lifestyle. Too bad life isn't that simple because there's someone standing in his way, and she looks furious. Haruka then freezes in place when he spots class rep, her gaze locked on him like a missile. Then with a sinking feeling, he asks her what's got her so worked up this time. Turns out, she's still upset about yesterday because Haruka already got chewed out by all the girls. But class rep hadn't had her turn yet. She then doesn't waste a second, laying into him for pulling such a reckless stunt and not taking her along, conveniently ignoring the fact that she was Tanaka's main target in the first place. Haruka, exhausted and eager to end this ordeal, mutters an apology and promises to let her know the next time he plans to do something life-threatening. Surprisingly, that seems to do the trick, and class rep now looking satisfied, so she turns on her heel and strides away, while Haruka slumps to the floor, staring at the ceiling and wondering how his life spiraled into this chaos. So if he doesn't figure something out soon, his dream of returning to his quiet and solitary life in the woods will never come true. But then inspiration strikes. If he uses the harem magnet ring on all the girls, they'll end up liking him so much they won't stay mad at him anymore. No anger means no guilt trips, and with no guilt trips, he'd finally be free to leave. Grinning at his genius plan, Haruka makes up his mind, which means he's heading into the dungeon today. Meanwhile, over at the Lord's mansion, Muriel is feeling a bit anxious because her father's been working himself to the bone lately, and she's worried it's taking a toll. So she tries persuading him to take a breather with a soothing cup of tea. But he's too wound up to relax because there are reports of monster sightings are cropping up all over the region, causing merchants to steer clear of the town. And as the Lord, he knows it's his responsibility to address the chaos. Just then, a guard bursts into the room, looking as pale as a ghost, with some truly awful news. A monstrous horde has been spotted near the dungeon. As fate would have it, Haruka has stumbled across this horde himself. While he wasn't exactly planning on a fight before reaching the dungeon, he's never one to shy away from a quick warm-up. Unbeknownst to Muriel, Haruka is already in the thick of battle, but she panics and rushes to the guild hall to alert the guildmaster. She frantically warns him that a massive horde of orcs is bearing down on the town, and if no one acts fast, the place will be reduced to rubble. The guild springs into action immediately. Among them is class rep, who steps up and volunteers to help defend the town. She quickly rounds up her classmates to join the effort, but that's when she realizes Haruka is nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, Haruka is cutting through the monster horde like a hot knife through butter, but he's a little taken aback by the sheer number of enemies, especially when an orc king enters the fray. Still, it hardly phases him after all. He can one-shot the whole lot without breaking a sweat. Back at the town gates, the adventurers are gearing up for what they expect to be an epic showdown. But by the time they assemble, the so-called horde has already been annihilated, and we see that Haruka having casually wiped out the Orc King and its minions. But then he takes a moment to reflect on how bizarre it is for so many monsters to appear at once. Then again, he quickly decides he doesn't really care and resumes his journey toward the dungeon. When he finally reaches the dungeon, Haruka slips past the guards and heads into the dungeon building, avoiding any unnecessary human interaction. Once inside, Haruka is blown away by how insanely detailed the dungeon interior is because it's like stepping into an overachiever's fantasy design project. But he quickly snaps out of it, knowing he can't let himself get sidetracked because he has an important mission to finish. He then starts hunting for the fabled harem magnet, but there's one tiny problem. He doesn't even know what the damn thing looks like. So like a clueless tourist, he starts wandering around aimlessly until he stumbles upon a treasure chest conveniently sitting in the middle of the hall. He then eagerly opens it, expecting some legendary loot, but after using his appraisal skill, he realizes it's nothing but junk. Frustrated but stubborn, he keeps searching the dungeon, only to find more worthless stuff. Finally, he gives up and decides to ask that shady merchant back in town for any leads. Meanwhile, back at the town gate, everyone's been on edge for hours, waiting for the orcs that Muriel warned about. People are starting to think she might have been bluffing. But just as the tension peaks, something emerges from the smoky horizon. So their hearts start racing. They draw their weapons. But then it turns out to be Haruka stumbling back and half asleep from a long day of adventuring. Oblivious to the intense atmosphere, Haruka looks around confused by why everyone seems so uptight. Class Rep then rushes over and explains that a horde of monsters is on its way to destroy the village, and she demands to know where he's been all day. But Haruka isn't about to admit he's been chasing after a harem magnet, so he just awkwardly stays silent. Godek then jumps in, asking if Haruka saw any orcs on the way, and only then does it hit him, and he casually mentions wiping out an orc horde earlier today. But for some reason, this news doesn't earn him any cheers. Instead, everyone seems mad. Later, both the Guildmaster and Muriel thank him for taking care of the orcs, but scold him for being reckless enough to fight a whole horde alone. The Guildmaster goes on to warn Haruka about increasing monster activity, with creatures even spilling out of the dungeon, so there's a real threat of a dungeon stampede soon, and he insists that Haruka promise not to do anything reckless again, and Haruka nods. Later, back in his room, Haruka flops onto his bed, exhausted and annoyed, between the Guildmaster, Muriel, and now practically the entire town keeping tabs on him, so sneaking out unnoticed is going to be a nightmare. The next day, Haruka heads straight to the magic item merchant. The guy isn't thrilled to see him, probably still salty after whatever Haruka pulled last time, but Haruka quickly assures him he's not here to shop for magic items. He just wants to ask one question, and he asks where can he find the harem magnet ring. The merchant admits he doesn't know of any harem magnet, but mentions a similar item called the pheromone ring which boosts charisma, and that sounds exactly like what Haruka's been looking for. Then when Haruka asks where it's located because he didn't find it on the first floor, so the merchant explains it's definitely not on the first floor of the dungeon, because anything that easy would have been snatched up ages ago. Instead, it's likely around the 50th floor, a depth no one's ever reached. The merchant then explains that there are 100 floors in total, but it's a brutal challenge to descend even a few. You have to defeat each floor boss to progress, and most of the dungeon remains uncharted. If Haruka really plans to go that deep, the merchant warns that he'll need to stock up on potions and recovery items, so Haruka takes the advice to heart and dashes off to prepare. Unbeknownst to him, the nerd squad overheard his conversation, and the moment they learn he's after the pheromone ring, they rush to Class Rep to snitch like rats. Class Rep and the other girls are immediately alarmed because if Haruka gets his hands on a ring that enhances charisma, they'd fall under his influence, making it impossible to say no to him, and that shit will make him do what he wants. The thought of Haruka running wild with that kind of power is terrifying, so they agree they have to stop him at all costs. After gathering his supplies, Haruka heads toward the dungeon, fully focused on his goal, but his sharp perception picks up on movement behind him, and when he turns around, he spots Class Rep leading the entire class, hot on his heels. Haruka halts and raises an eyebrow, asking why they're all here. Class Rep flips the question back at him, demanding to know what he's doing. She accuses him of going after the pheromone ring, but Haruka denies it with an absurd lie, claiming he's actually after the tree's ring, which lets the wearer talk to animals. But naturally nobody buys it, realizing there's no way to convince them to leave him alone. Haruka does what Haruka does best, and he bolts. Class Rep and the rest of the class then tail Haruka into the dungeon. He's ahead for now, but he knows if Class Rep gets the pheromone ring first, she'll make him follow her rules, and for a proud loner like Haruka, that's an absolute nightmare. Determined to stay free, he picks up the pace, sprinting to widen the gap between them. Class Rep then shouts after him, warning that running in a dungeon is dangerous because he might trigger a trap. But Haruka, ever the smartass, yells back that traps are no big deal since his luck stat is maxed out. Sure, traps might not get him, but poor dungeon construction is another story entirely. As he steadies himself against a wall, it crumbles under his touch, and before he can react, Haruka plummets into what feels like an endless chasm. Class Rep then reaches out to grab him, but she's too late because Haruka is already falling into the abyss. He's been falling for what seems like forever, and somehow, in all his panic, he's forgotten he has the airwalk skill that could save him. Eventually, the bottom of the pit comes into view, so Haruka thinks quickly and uses earth magic to soften the ground, creating a cushion to break his fall. When he lands, he takes a moment to assess the situation. Given how deep he's fallen, he wonders if he's somehow reached the dungeon's infamous 100th floor. There's only one path ahead, and Haruka's gut tells him it leads straight to the final boss. He has no intention of dealing with that shit, so he starts brainstorming ways to climb back up. Remembering his airwalk skill, Haruka tries using it to ascend the chasm, but it's no good because the fall was way too deep for that to work. So with no other option, he reluctantly decides to follow the ominous path ahead. But on the bright side, the fall wasn't all bad because it unlocked 2 new skills: trap detection and spatial awareness. Using these, Haruka scans the area and confirms there are no traps between him and the next room. But just as he starts to relax, he discovers something even worse. He isn't on the 100th floor at all. He's on floor 101. That can only mean one thing: he stumbled into the hidden boss's lair. Dealing with that shit is going to be a colossal pain. But with no other choice, Haruka takes a deep breath and starts making his way down the eerie hallway. The air then grows thick with mana, making it hard for Haruka to breathe, but he pushes forward until he reaches the boss's room. As he opens the heavy door, a tidal wave of oppressive mana washes over him, and standing before him is the dungeon's secret boss, the Dungeon Emperor. Haruka immediately knows he's in trouble, so he activates his appraisal skill to get some insight into his opponent, and what he learns sends a chill down his spine because the Dungeon Emperor is level 100. Meanwhile, Class Rep and the rest of the class are making steady progress down the dungeon in search of Haruka. They've reached the 47th floor, but there's still no sign of him. The group is growing anxious, suspecting he may have fallen all the way to the bottom, so Shimazaki tries to reassure everyone, suggesting Haruka might have used one of the dungeon's return portals to get back to the surface. But Tatsuya crushes that hope, explaining that the portals only appear after defeating the floor boss. Worse, they don't appear at all if you skip the normal dungeon path, which means Haruka is likely stranded. The mood grows heavier as the class recalls the legend of the Dungeon Emperor, a foe so powerful that even the Dungeon King pales in comparison. The girls start to realize they might be woefully under-equipped for a rescue mission this deep in the dungeon. Still, Class Rep refuses to abandon Haruka, insisting they press on, so everyone agrees to continue descending, hoping against hope they'll reach him in time. Back in the boss room, Haruka is assessing his option. The appraisal skill told him almost nothing, revealing only that his opponent is a no-life King, a lich of terrifying power. Haruka knows liches are master spellcasters, meaning he can't risk getting caught in a long-range battle, so he'll need to close the distance fast. And without hesitation, he flash steps behind the lich, aiming for a clean strike. But just as he thinks he's gained the upper hand, the Dungeon Emperor spins around with lightning speed, countering his attack with its blade. So Haruka realizes this fight is going to be far tougher than he thought, and his usual tricks won't be enough against an opponent like this. Outside the dungeon, Muriel and her father see ominous dark clouds swirling above it, a clear sign that something catastrophic is about to unfold. Her father, sensing the urgency, orders her to head to the guild and alert them to brace for any emergencies that might arise. Meanwhile, Haruka is locked in an intense mental and physical struggle, desperately trying to outmaneuver the Dungeon Emperor's godlike speed. So he decides to activate every speed-enhancing ability he possesses, hoping to tip the scales, and then he darts across the room in a chaotic flurry. But he finds that each strike he lands is still agonizingly too slow, forcing him to push himself even harder. Despite refining his movements with each attempt, Haruka can't seem to gain the upper hand. Every blow he dodges leaves him narrowly escaping death, his endurance fraying with each passing moment. But in the midst of this grueling battle, Haruka's contact lenses awaken, a new ability called Foresight, and that makes him begin seeing fragmented flashes of the future. But this new power comes with a deadly caveat. If Haruka lets his guard slip for even a moment, he will die. With no better option, Haruka throws everything he has into a relentless assault, knowing full well his life hangs in the balance. As the grueling fight drags on, Haruka starts to feel exhilarated, almost enjoying the clash. But unfortunately, his body betrays him because he notices that his knees buckle, and his breath comes in ragged gasps. And also because of all that fighting, his stamina and magical reserves are completely spent, teetering him on the brink of unconsciousness. Meanwhile, the Dungeon Emperor is unnervingly calm, seems like it's just warming up. Haruka forces himself to rise, muscles screaming in protest, and now he seems vulnerable so that one decisive attack would end him. Yet the Emperor does not strike. Haruka, having suspected from the beginning that this was no ordinary monster, suddenly notices something peculiar: the complete absence of bloodlust from the Emperor. And this revelation hits hard. The creature has been toying with him, holding back the entire time. So Haruka gets offended and enraged by the lack of seriousness, drags himself upright and charges at the Emperor in one final act of defiance. However, he's still hopelessly outpaced. The Emperor moves effortlessly, pinning Haruka with a blade at his neck. It could end him in an instant, but it doesn't, and Haruka, battered and confused, can't begin to fathom why. Just then, Haruka notices a sinister swirl of miasma encircling the dungeon emperor, and it looks malevolent, hinting that the emperor might be forced into this fight by the miasma's influence. As Haruka pieces this together, his staff begins to glow, inexplicably absorbing the miasma. And while he has no idea why on earth his staff can do this, he just rolls with it and starts attacking, aiming to draw out all the miasma. With a few decisive swings, Haruka successfully disrupts the concentration of miasma, and once it's completely absorbed, the dungeon emperor lowers its sword and stands still. Haruka's hunch was right. The emperor was being controlled by the miasma, and now the truth becomes clear. The dungeon emperor had been waiting for someone strong enough to free it from this torment, someone who could end its suffering. That's why it hadn't delivered the finishing blow earlier, because it had hoped Haruka would rise to the occasion. But even though Haruka has banished the miasma controlling the emperor, a heavy presence of ambient darkness lingers in the area, so it's only a matter of time before the emperor succumbs again. And that makes Haruka realize he must act quickly. At first, he considers the grim option of ending the emperor's life to put an end to its misery, but he can't bring himself to do it. Instead, driven by compassion, he hugs the emperor, feeling the weight of her suffering. In an unexpected twist, this act triggers Haruka's subjugation skill, and to his surprise the emperor becomes subjugated. Though this wasn't part of Haruka's plan, it turns out to be a fortunate turn of events because the emperor can't fall under the darkness's control if she's bound to Haruka. Unsure how she feels about the situation, Haruka hesitates before asking if she's angry about being subjugated, but the emperor shakes her head, silently assuring him that she's okay with it. Haruka feels a wave of relief when he hears that, but this also reassures him that she can understand him, so communicating shouldn't be much of an issue. Now that they're on friendly terms, Haruka decides to check her stats to see if anything has changed, but to his shock, her level has reset to 1, apparently a side effect of the subjugation. On top of that, he can now see her name, and it's Angelica. And that's when it hits him like a ton of bricks. The dungeon emperor is a girl, so panic sets in as Haruka imagines class rep blowing a gasket when she finds out he subjugated another girl. But there's no time to dwell on that now, so Haruka asks Angelica if she'd like to leave the dungeon with him. She agrees, and the two head through the door, finding themselves on the 100th floor of the dungeon. Haruka then activates his spatial awareness skill to scan the area, and he quickly locates a staircase at the edge of the room, which should be their way out. But as soon as they enter the space, the floor boss spawns in. Haruka's heart sinks because he is exhausted from his fight with Angelica, and he also knows that he only survived because she hadn't been trying to kill him. But this boss is a level 100 living armor and exudes pure murderous intent. Haruka desperately wants to reach the staircase without fighting, and a risky idea takes shape in his mind. He uses earth magic to collapse part of the ceiling, intending to climb through the opening with airwalk. But before he can execute his plan, two minotaurs materialize and glare at him like he's their next meal. Feeling a surge of dread, Haruka appraises the newcomers and nearly faints when he sees they're both level 99. And that shit makes his situation just go from bad to catastrophic. The minotaurs then leap down, but in a lucky twist of fate, they land directly on the living armor, causing massive damage to all three monsters. Haruka doesn't waste the opportunity, so he jumps into action and finishes them off. As he collects the magic crystals left behind, he notices Angelica eyeing the leftover armor pieces the monsters drop. So with a smile, Haruka tells her she can take them if she wants. Angelica eagerly puts on the armor, but it's ridiculously bulky on her, so Haruka immediately doubts it's a good fit. Then out of nowhere, the armor starts glowing and reshapes itself to fit Angelica like a glove. Haruka breathes a sigh of relief, glad that Angelica no longer has her bare bones exposed. But he's also a bit uneasy because after all they found this magic armor in a dungeon, so it's probably not all sunshine and rainbows. So he decides to appraise it just to be safe, but he finds out that it's not safe at all, because the armor is cursed with a binding spell, meaning Angelica is now permanently stuck with it. She furiously glares at Haruka for not warning her sooner, though in fairness being a skeleton didn't leave her with a ton of wardrobe options to begin with. Meanwhile, on the dungeon's 50th floor, Haruka's classmates are frantically searching for him. Most of them think it's a waste of time, assuming Haruka will eventually stroll in, claim he cleared the entire dungeon solo, and probably add a smug remark to boot. But while that certainly sounds like something he'd do, Class Rep refuses to sit idly by and leads the group to the boss room to keep looking. But when she throws the doors open, everyone freezes in terror as they come face to face with a massive Cyclops as the floor boss. Back in the city, Muriel rushes into the guild and informs the guildmaster that something unusual is happening in the dungeon. Though she's not sure what's wrong, her gut tells her it could escalate into something dangerous. The guildmaster points out that there haven't been any reports from the guard stationed at the dungeon entrance. But Godek then dryly reminds everyone that the guard has a brain capacity rivaling room temperature, so trusting him to notice anything significant is wishful thinking. And he adds that they need to prepare for the worst just in case, so off-tier volunteers to rally the guild members. Speaking of preparation, the guildmaster asks about the group of new adventurers, as their help could be critical right now. But neither off-tier nor Godek have seen Haruka's classmates today, and while it's normal for Haruka to disappear on random escapades, the fact that they've all disappeared is starting to seem like a real problem that's definitely happening. On floor 98, Haruka finally manages to cheer Angelica up by giving her a cape to complement her armor, making her look a bit more regal. Just as the mood starts to lighten, Haruka senses a monster nearby. Using his appraisal skill, he discovers it's a lick, a terrifying foe immune to all physical attacks. The only way to defeat it is with holy magic, which Haruka doesn't know how to use. He briefly considers creating another hole in the roof to escape, but after the fiasco with the Minotaurs, he decides it's too risky because who knows what kind of nightmare might drop in this time, so he can't do that shit again. With no holy magic at his disposal, Haruka decides to rely on his trusty staff, which seems oddly effective at clearing the lick's miasma. So he starts poking it with the staff. To his amazement and mild confusion, the lick gradually fades away. Haruka has no idea why this worked, but he's not about to complain because a win is a win. Continuing their climb, Haruka and Angelica reach the 97th floor, where they're greeted by a swarm of venomous moth monsters. Haruka knows direct combat isn't an option because one dose of venom could spell the end for him. Thinking strategically, he conjures a massive fireball, using it as bait to draw the moths in before incinerating them all at once. The two then move up to the 96th floor, and this time the duo encounters venomous caterpillars that spit out sticky strings capable of immobilizing anything that touches them. Navigating this floor without getting trapped would be a nightmare under normal circumstances, but Haruka takes a shortcut. Using earth magic, he rolls up the entire floor like a carpet, flattening the caterpillars in one fell swoop. Things are looking up as they progress, but when Haruka and Angelica arrive on the 95th floor, it's clear something is off. Before they can fully process the change in atmosphere, they're attacked by the floor boss, and it's a living sword. Unlike the other bosses they've faced so far, this one is level 100, far stronger than its floor suggests. The sword then immediately lunges at Haruka with blinding speed, but he manages to dodge it and attempts to sneak behind it for a counterattack. But unfortunately, the sword anticipates his move, dodging before he can strike, and that makes Haruka quickly realize this won't be a simple fight. The sword's movements are impossibly fast and erratic, far beyond what any humanoid could achieve. To make matters worse, it's accompanied by helper swords that relentlessly attack Haruka from every angle. So there's no way in hell Haruka could even keep up with this sword. But just as Haruka says this, an idea strikes him. There's someone fast enough to handle this sword monster. He calls out to Angelica, asking her to tag in. Angelica, more than ready to prove herself, draws her sword with a determined grin and steps into the fray. The living sword immediately senses danger and rallies its helper swords into a defensive formation, preparing to block Angelica's assault. But as she charges forward, she cleaves the main sword cleanly in half with a single decisive swing. Haruka is left stunned because Angelica's strength hasn't diminished at all. Even though bosses usually lose some of their power when they switch sides, but Angelica still seems as powerful as ever, and with her power combined with his, he's confident they'll clear the dungeon in no time. Meanwhile, back on the 50th floor, Haruka's classmates are locked in a desperate struggle against the Cyclops, and things are looking grim. Several students are already injured, and one more hit could mean the end for them. Frustrated but determined, they find themselves asking what would Haruka do. Even though his advice has never been particularly helpful, they know one thing for sure: Haruka would never give up. With that in mind, Kakizaki and Oda hatch a risky plan and explain it to class rep, who immediately protests because it's far too dangerous. But given the situation, there aren't many other options, so she reluctantly agrees. Kakizaki then takes his position on the front lines, standing toe-to-toe with the Cyclops. The Cyclops is slow but immensely powerful, and Kakizaki is banking on his acceleration skills to stay one step ahead. As the girls in the group launch cover fire to keep the Cyclops distracted, Kakizaki charges, aiming for its head. However, just as he's about to strike, the Cyclops swats him aside like a fly. Kakizaki crashes to the ground, disheartened that he couldn't even land a hit. But this was all part of the plan because Kakizaki was merely a decoy, creating the perfect opening for Oda. With the Cyclops focused on Kakizaki, Oda lines up his shot and fires a precision attack, striking the Cyclops directly in the eye. Meanwhile, Haruka and Angelica have reached the 85th floor, where the boss fights are noticeably easier. However, just as they begin to relax, a deep tremor shakes the entire dungeon, making it feel like a dungeon stampede is on the horizon. At the dungeon entrance, the brainless guard finally starts to notice that something is seriously wrong with this place. Monsters are appearing all over the place, and his slow brain finally catches up, so he panically sprints back to town as fast as he can to sound the warning. Everyone in town was already on edge, expecting something like this could happen. But now that it's confirmed the stampede is on its way, the guild master grows gravely concerned. As the monsters close in, he knows they are utterly doomed because the stampede is far too much for them to handle. Still, there's no choice, and everyone will have to put up one hell of a last fight. Meanwhile, Oftir and Godek can't help but worry about Haruka's classmates, who are still trapped inside the dungeon, but there's nothing they can do to reach them at this moment. Desperate for answers, the guild master digs through old scrolls because he recalls reading about dungeon stampedes in the past. He then pulls out an old scroll and explains the lore surrounding dungeons to the others. In this world, dungeons are living entities, and when they reach their 100th floor, the excess monsters created within spill out onto the surface, causing chaos. The adventurers then ask if there's any way to stop it, and the guildmaster keeps reading. According to the scroll, killing the boss at the dungeon's lowest level will destroy the dungeon itself, and all the monsters spawned by the stampede will vanish. However, defeating a dungeon's final boss is no small task. The idea that someone might already have done it and is climbing back up right now seems laughably impossible, and definitely not happening. Resigned to their fate, the guildmaster shifts focus to survival, so he orders Oftir to evacuate the civilians to a nearby shelter, and commands Godek to rally all the adventurers available, because if they're going down fighting. Meanwhile, Haruka is still climbing out of the dungeon, and this floor is swarming with griffins, so instead of wasting energy fighting them head-on, he comes up with a sneaky plan: poison some fish and let the griffins chow down until they drop unconscious. It works like a charm, and with another floor cleared, Haruka's climb is getting easier as he goes higher. On the flip side, his classmates aren't having such an easy time. They're stuck on the 54th floor, barely making progress as they push forward, determined to find Haruka. But unfortunately, their situation takes a turn for the worse when they run into an entire horde of werewolves that look like they're ready to rip them apart. Up on the surface, the adventurers are rallying at the city gate. They've just fought off the first wave of dungeon monsters, but things are looking bleak. At this pace, it's only a matter of time before they're overwhelmed. But everyone knows their only real shot at survival is to take out the dungeon boss. And of course, the only person crazy and skilled enough to pull that off is Haruka. The guildmaster considers sending a message into the dungeon to get Haruka's help, but the adventurers can't afford to leave the city undefended. That's when the guildmaster turns to Muriel, who's hanging around doing pretty much nothing. Muriel is completely taken aback, shaking her head and trying to refuse because she doesn't want to enter the dungeon. But the guildmaster insists that Haruka would be far more likely to listen to a request from a cute girl like her, and she's the best chance they have. However, the guildmaster knows sending Muriel alone would be a death sentence since she isn't much of a fighter, so that's why he asks Oftir to accompany her. Oftir doesn't mind the assignment, but he's hesitant about leaving his post since the town needs all the defense it can get. The guildmaster then reassures him that the rest of the team will hold the line while he's gone. So Oftir accepts the task and tells Muriel to hurry up so they can get moving. Muriel, still panicking and resists at first, but as she looks around at the wounded and weary adventurers giving their all to protect the city, something shifts in her, so she gathers every ounce of courage and finally agrees to face the danger in the dungeon to find Haruka. Meanwhile, Haruka and Angelica have just reached the 81st floor, which looks less like a dungeon and more like a chaotic water park on steroids. Haruka is so thrown off by the unexpected scenery that he doesn't even notice the monsters lurking in the water. So when a bunch of fish suddenly leap out and try to slice him up, Angelica has to step in and save his distracted ass. Haruka sheepishly apologizes for getting sidetracked, but Angelica brushes it off because she's actually having a blast hanging out with him. Haruka, now more alert, scans the water and realizes it's teeming with fish. And if all of them decided to attack at once, he'd be fish food in seconds, so he needs a plan to deal with the speed of the fish first. Thinking back to an old One Piece episode he watched years ago, he gets an idea and uses his ice magic to freeze the fish in the water. Sure enough, the fish end up encased in ice and float harmlessly to the surface. So Haruka's plan works like a charm, and he continues freezing the fish as he and Angelica make their way across the water. But then the floor boss shows up, and it's not playing games because it sends a massive wave crashing toward them. Angelica, ever the quick thinker, jumps out of harm's way, but Haruka on the other hand zones out like a potato, staring blankly as the wave slams into him and sends him plunging deep into the water. For a moment, it looks like Angelica is going to have to face the boss alone. But just as things seem bleak, Haruka bursts back out of the water in style, riding a handmade earth surfboard like a pro. Using the momentum, he closes in on the fish monster and lands a clean, devastating blow right in the middle of its head. The boss goes down, and with the immediate danger gone, Haruka hops over to the exit with Angelica. He asks if she's okay, and when she says she is, he's visibly relieved. Haruka suggests they keep moving, and though he wasn't thrilled about this dungeon adventure at first, it's starting to grow on him. With his strength and growing confidence, he's realizing that even the dungeon bosses aren't as intimidating as they used to be. As Haruka and Angelica continue climbing the dungeon floors, they stumble upon several god-tier artifacts, including the Ring of Boundless Fortune, the Blessed Bangle, and a necromancy orb. Haruka marvels at how cool these items are, noting they must be worth a fortune. However, he's unsure whether to keep them for himself or sell them for a hefty profit. But after thinking it over, he realizes that these blessed items won't do much for him, and he already has an absurd amount of luck. So he doesn't need curses removed, and has no use for necromancy. So Haruka decides to give them all to Angelica because he figures that even if they don't directly help, they might bring her some good fortune, something she could use as someone cursed to live her life as a skeleton. Angelica hesitates, not wanting to take advantage of Haruka's kindness, but he insists since he genuinely has no use for them. And after some coaxing, she finally accepts, and the gesture makes her genuinely happy because it's the first time anyone has ever given her a gift. And though Haruka doesn't quite get why she's so emotional, he's happy that it made her day. He then suggests they keep moving, and they press on. But what Haruka doesn't realize is that the blessed items he gave Angelica have done the impossible, because they've broken both the curse of the armor and the curse that turned her into a skeleton. Angelica now regains her human form, but she feels a whirlwind of emotions toward Haruka, so she decides to keep her restored appearance a secret for the time being and silently follows Haruka. Meanwhile, on the 54th floor, Haruka's classmates have just finished their brutal battle with the werewolf. The fight leaves them completely drained, but they are determined to keep moving so they can find Haruka before anything happens to him. As they prepare to continue, the sound of movement echoes from the hallway ahead. They tense up fearing another monster. But to their relief, the figures approaching turn out to be Miriel and Oftir. Back at Haruka's hell, he and Angelica have just arrived on the 74th floor. And it's shaping up to be their toughest challenge yet because the entire floor is engulfed in flames, making it almost impossible to see clearly or move safely. Then, as they navigate through the scorching heat, Haruka loses focus, trips over a rock, and nearly tumbles face first into a patch of flames. But luckily Angelica reacts quickly and catches him before he gets crispy. Seeing how disoriented and unsteady Haruka has become, Angelica points to a small clearing and suggests that he rest there for a bit. Haruka reluctantly agrees, wishing he could find some way to escape the oppressive heat even for just a moment. But that's when inspiration strikes. Spotting a small hole in the wall nearby, Haruka uses his wind magic to create a cooling breeze through the hole, providing much needed relief. But by coincidence, the hole Haruka is using happens to connect to another one, and on the other side of it stands Class Rep. Hearing his voice through the passage, she immediately starts shouting to get his attention. Haruka recognizes her voice and realizes this hole must connect to the one he fell through at the start of his dungeon journey. So it's an incredible stroke of luck that he found it. Class Rep then excitedly asks if there's any way Haruka can climb up the hole to reach her. But unfortunately, he's already tried scaling it before and knows his airwalk skill isn't enough for such a steep vertical climb. Haruka then asks if Class Rep or her group has any rope or climbing equipment they can lower down to help him. But unfortunately none of them anticipated needing climbing equipment, so they didn't bring anything that could help. Haruka then asks Class Rep what floor she's currently on. And when she responds that she's on the 54th floor, he quickly realizes they're not too far apart since he's on the 74th floor. So if he hurries, he could close the gap in no time. Haruka gets ready to leave, but Class Rep calls out to stop him, saying there's something else he needs to hear. She informs Haruka that the city is in dire straits, overrun by monsters, and it won't last much longer unless the stampede is stopped. Miriel and Oftir saw the second wave of the stampede heading for the city on their way to the dungeon. And while the city has held out so far, it won't survive a third wave. Class Rep explains that the only way to end the stampede is to defeat the dungeon boss. But the moment she mentions the dungeon boss, Haruka's heart sinks because he knows she's talking about Angelica. He then informs Class Rep and the others that the dungeon boss has already been defeated. They're stunned to hear this and amazed at his accomplishment. But if that's true, the stampede should have stopped. Off-tier then presses Haruka, asking if he's absolutely sure the boss was killed because the stampede won't end unless it's killed for good. This puts Haruka in a serious moral dilemma because if he doesn't kill Angelica, the town will likely be destroyed, but he starts questioning himself if he can really bring himself to sacrifice her for the greater good. When Haruka first met Angelica, he had no hesitation about defeating her, but now that he knows she was imprisoned by the dungeon's darkness for countless years, he can't bring himself to do it. Haruka then admits to class rep and the others that he didn't kill the boss and has no intention of doing so. He acknowledges that it may seem selfish, but he's determined to find a way to save both Angelica and the town, and he thinks he has an idea that might work. But he'll need Angelica's help to pull it off. Class rep is unsure what Haruka is planning, but she decides to trust him because she knows he can be reckless at times. But when it truly matters, Haruka always finds a way to protect everyone. Confident in his resolve, she places her faith in him, certain that everything will turn out alright in the end. Haruka thanks her for believing in him and promises that no matter what, he'll save the town and free Angelica from the dungeon's grasp. The second wave of monsters is closing in on Omui Town, and the adventurers gathered outside the city walls are fighting tooth and nail to keep them out. But with the forces they've got right now, holding them off feels almost impossible. Still, the guildmaster yells for everyone to give it everything they've got because this is their home, and there's no backing down. Meanwhile, deep in the dungeon, Haruka knows he needs to hustle and get out before the city falls to ruin, so he turns to Angelica and asks if they can speedrun the rest of the climb. Angelica, as calm as ever, nods without hesitation, and together they take off running to clear the floors as fast as they can. They reach the 73rd floor and find themselves face to face with two lizardmen, and without breaking stride, Haruka remembers that cold magic works wonders on reptiles, so he freezes them solid with a quick spell, and Angelica smashes them into glittering shards. On the next floor, they encounter a swarm of scorpions, so Haruka wastes no time, flooding the area with smoke to disorient the creatures while Angelica moves in for swift and decisive strikes. Then comes the next floor, dominated by a massive hellhound boss. Haruka has no convenient magic for this one, so he improvises, and with a flick of his wrist, he lobs a stink bomb that is worse than your grandma's fart straight into the beast's nose. The distraction works perfectly, giving Angelica the opening she needs to take it down in one clean blow. Once the hellhound is dealt with, Haruka takes a moment to sort through the growing pile of loot they've gathered, and then he wonders if combining some of it could help speed up their dungeon run. Still, he's a little frustrated though, since the elusive pheromone ring he came here for is still nowhere to be found, and while he's busy with the loot, he notices Angelica looking uneasy, so he tells her he's got an experiment in mind once they're back in town, but that's not what's on her mind. Angelica's concerned that Haruka is pushing himself way too hard, so she suggests he take a moment to rest. Haruka knows she's right because he feels the exhaustion pulling at him, but he also knows he can't stop now. The two then make their way to the 69th floor, which appears to be a dense forest stage. At first, there's no sign of the boss, but then an owl perches silently on a nearby branch. Haruka quickly appraises it and confirms that this owl is the floor's boss. It's called a sleep owl, and as the name suggests, it likely has a sleep-based ability. But before Haruka can prepare to counter it, the owl's eyes glow, attempting to put him under a sleep effect. Normally, Haruka's well-being skill would block all status effects, but his exhaustion from pushing himself too hard prevents it from activating. So as a result, he falls asleep almost immediately. A short while later, Haruka wakes up to find himself being carried on Angelica's back. While he was out cold, Angelica took down the sleep owl and picked him up to keep moving forward. Even though Haruka is awake now, Angelica insists he rest a little longer while she continues carrying him. Meanwhile, back with Haruka's classmate, they're working to clear a few extra floors in hopes of catching up to him. But their progress is halted when they run into a level 100 Sphinx. The creature is completely overwhelming, and none of their attacks seem to do any real damage. And worse, any minor wounds they manage to inflict are instantly healed. Off-tier, who has read about dungeon sphinxes before, explains that fighting it is pointless. These creatures are immune to all types of attacks and can only be defeated by solving a puzzle. And without a solution, the Sphinx is essentially immortal. So unless one of them can figure out the puzzle, they are completely doomed. Back in the dungeon, Haruka and Angelica reach the 59th floor, and after being carried by Angelica for most of the climb, Haruka feels fully refreshed and ready to continue. But suddenly, his perception skill flares up, warning him of something happening on the upper floors. He can't shake the feeling that something terrible is unfolding, so without hesitation, he takes off rushing upward as fast as he can. Up on the 57th floor, Haruka's classmates are at their wits' end, completely hopeless against the Sphinx. None of their magical or physical attacks make a dent, and they have no idea what puzzle they need to solve to defeat it. Then, while the group is spiraling into despair, Class Rep loses sight of the Sphinx, and by the time she realizes it's gone, it's too late because the beast is about to crush her underfoot. But before she becomes Footprint, Haruka arrives in the nick of time. Having already appraised the Sphinx, he knows all about its immunity to attack damage. But luckily, while Haruka makes his way to this floor, he had picked up an item that can negate all defenses, including damage immunity. So without hesitation, Haruka uses the item to disable the Sphinx's defenses. And with the opening created, Angelica leaps forward and swiftly slashes the Sphinx's head, finishing it off in one clean strike. Now that the Sphinx is defeated and everyone is safe, Haruka lands beside them and greets his classmates with a casual "I'm back." Relief washes over the group because without Haruka's timely arrival, they would have been done for. However, Class Rep is quick to notice the mysterious lady standing next to Haruka, so she curiously asks who she is. Haruka begins to explain what happened to him at the bottom of the dungeon. But before he can finish, the floor beneath him suddenly collapses, and he almost falls all the way back to the dungeon's depths. But fortunately, Haruka has been through this once before and learned to be more vigilant. Reacting quickly, he uses the falling rubble to jump back to safety, and once he's back on solid ground, he reassures everyone that they don't need to worry, claiming he won't fall for the same trap twice. But fate has other plans, and the floor collapses again. This time Haruka isn't prepared, and it seems he's about to take a long fall for real. But Class Rep isn't about to let that happen, so she immediately jumps after him, determined to catch him before it's too late. She's learned from her own failures too, so this time she doesn't miss, and her hand catches Haruka's just in time, and with a determined effort, she pulls him back to solid ground. Everyone is relieved that Haruka didn't fall back into the labyrinth, but the moment is short-lived because there's no time to celebrate. The next wave of the stampede is already barreling toward them, and it's colossal, far larger than anything they've faced before. And if a wave this size reaches Amui, the city doesn't stand a chance. Class Rep then turns to Haruka, her voice edged with desperation, and asks if he really has a plan to stop all these monsters. Haruka nods confidently and assures her he does, but Angelica is the key. However, with time running out, there's no chance to explain everything. So off Tear steps in, urging everyone to head for the teleportation gate so they can return to Amui immediately. As they sprint toward the gate, Class Rep can't help but ask Haruka how he managed to fight his way past such powerful monsters and make it this far. Haruka, with his usual mix of humility and pride, admits that he probably wouldn't have survived through conventional means, but with a little luck and some creative thinking, he managed to pull through. Eventually, the group reaches Amui and finds Godek and the Guildmaster waiting on a hill just outside the city. The two are relieved to see reinforcements finally arriving, but their relief is short-lived because Miriel points toward the horizon, directing everyone's attention to the monstrous horde approaching the city. And when I say monstrous, I mean absolutely massive, a wave so vast and overwhelming that even Haruka couldn't hope to take it on alone. So what any little hope the Guildmaster had is now become fart as he takes in the sight. The entire city trembles under the thunderous footsteps of the approaching monster army, and then we see the Lord of Amui doing everything he can to calm the frightened citizens who have gathered there for safety, reassuring them that he is sure the adventurers will save the city. Meanwhile, outside the city, the adventurers are nearly paralyzed by despair, and the sheer magnitude of this stampede has crushed any hope they had left. But Haruka, ever the calm strategist, turns to Angelica and tells her it's time to do what they discussed. And without hesitation, Angelica steps forward, moving past the stunned crowd. Then she draws her sword and plants it firmly into the ground, and a surge of energy begins radiating outward. Haruka explains to the bewildered onlookers that while Angelica isn't quite the same as when he faced her in the dungeon, she's still the Dungeon Emperor, and that title gives her absolute authority over all the monsters from her dungeon. So that makes her possess the power to erase every single one of them. Then, as the wave of energy spreads, the monsters begin vanishing, one after another, until the entire horde is gone. With the crisis averted, Haruka approaches Angelica, offering her a celebratory fist bump. Relief sweeps over the group, but his classmates are left scratching their heads, demanding to know how he pulled off such a miraculous save. Haruka casually explains that he didn't do much, and it was all Angelica. Oda, one of the nerdier classmates, suddenly realizes what's going on and blurts out that Angelica must be the Dungeon Emperor. This revelation shocks the group, who immediately ask if that makes her a monster. Haruka waves off their concerns, assuring them there's no reason to fear Angelica because he spent a lot of time with her in the dungeon and knows she's a genuinely kind person. Skeptical but trusting Haruka's word, the group accepts his explanation. Oda, however, isn't done and recalls from his readings that the Dungeon Emperor is supposed to be the most powerful being in the dungeon. Haruka smirks and calls Oda creepy for knowing such obscure details, but he admits Oda's not wrong. Angelica is incredibly strong, and even after her level reset, her abilities are still absurdly overpowered. That's how she was able to defeat every monster in the dungeon. So Haruka guessed she could use that same strength to command the monsters and eliminate the stampede. Haruka then clarifies that Angelica's ability only works on monsters from her own dungeon, and they need to be nearby for her to influence them. And if another stampede were to come from a different dungeon in the future, her powers wouldn't work on those monsters. While discussing what Angelica did, the girls ask if she vaporized the monsters. Haruka shakes his head and clarifies that all the monsters are still alive, but what Angelica actually did was teleport them back into the dungeon and give them an order to stay there, since it was a command from the Dungeon Emperor herself. Haruka is confident they won't be coming back out anytime soon. This means the city of Amui will remain safe for the foreseeable future, and life can finally return to normal. The next day, Haruka comes up with an idea for all the equipment he brought back from the dungeon. After sorting through his inventory, he asks class rep to gather their classmates. Once everyone arrives, they're greeted by an incredible display of treasure laid out on tables in front of them. The gear is rare and valuable, and excitement quickly fills the air. Haruka announces he's holding a super special sale. They can pick whatever they want, but they'll have to pay for it. Both the boys and girls are pumped, ready to compete for the best items. However, when the sale starts, the girls immediately go into full-on Black Friday mode. The sale turns into a chaotic battlefield as the girls fight tooth and nail for the best gear. The guys, intimidated by the frenzy, backed off because they were too scared to approach the tables. Feeling a bit sorry for them, Haruka decides to cut them a break and pulls out a stash of extra equipment he hadn't originally planned to sell. After the dust settles, everyone seems happy with their purchases. Haruka is satisfied, knowing the new gear will help keep his classmates safer in the future. And with that done, the only thing left on his mind is figuring out what to do about Angelica. Since she'll be staying in town for a while, Haruka worries about how she'll adjust. After being isolated in the dungeon for so many years, Angelica probably isn't used to socializing, so Haruka suspects she might have a hard time getting along with the other girls. Then we see that the rest of Haruka's classmates are all still high off the great loot they received and are in a joyous mood. And Haruka is equally thrilled since he has just earned a pretty bundle from selling the stuff. He's still in the middle of counting all this money when class rep comes up to him, so he hastily puts it all away and turns to ask her what she needs. Class rep explains that she wants a proper introduction to Angelica and wants to know how Haruka managed to become friends with her, given that she's the feared Dungeon Emperor. Assuming he used the pheromone ring to win Angelica over, she confronts him, but Haruka clarifies that he never found the ring. Instead, he admits it was his subjugate skill that made Angelica his companion. This revelation sends class rep into a yelling fit, accusing him of using his subjugation skill on another girl in the first place. She refuses to let it go and demands an explanation. But Haruka really doesn't have much to say in his defense, so instead she would ask Angelica the important details and drags her off. Haruka is relieved he would not have to bear class rep's walling this time, but is also worried if it would be okay leaving Angelica to talk with her all alone. Class rep then gets all the girls in one room, eager for Angelica's story. But it's incredibly awkward since Angelica hasn't said a word yet. But the girls' curiosity doesn't wane, and class rep gently encourages Angelica to share a little about herself. Then bit by bit the girls learn about her tragic past, and how she was trapped in the dungeon's deepest recesses until Haruka finds her. But instead of killing her, he used his subjugate skill on her, which breaks the curse that kept her confined within the dungeon. Having listened to all of this, class rep feels compelled to do something special for Angelica, and invites her to join them for a bath. And by this time, everybody had still thought that Angelica was a skeleton. So as they started helping her get off her armor, they were sent into shock to see such a very healthy body and shapely thighs instead of skeleton bone. Back in Haruka's room, he feels relieved to finally sleep in his own bed again. But there's a tinge of disappointment that he never found the pheromone ring. But on the bright side, his recent dungeon adventure boosted his level by 6 and granted him several amazing new skills. Still, despite his improved stats, he knows he wouldn't have been able to stop the stampede without Angelica and the others, so if he truly wants to live as a loner, he realizes he'll need to be strong enough to fight alone without relying on anyone. And with that in mind, he decides it's time to head back into the woods. The next morning, instead of sneaking out of town, Haruka chooses to be upfront and asks class rep if she's okay with him leaving for a while. She doesn't seem to mind, given that nothing major is happening in town at the moment. However, her thoughts were elsewhere after what she saw yesterday, which was that Angelica had returned to normal. And to her dismay, Angelica is too damn hot, so she worried that Angelica might steal Haruka away. Meanwhile, Haruka asks Angelica if she'd like to join him in the woods, and she happily agrees. Before long, Haruka and Angelica make it to the forest, where Haruka revels in the fresh air, enjoying how long it's been since he last visited. Taking the opportunity, he decides to practice his new gear shift skill and asks Angelica if she thinks she can keep up, and with a nod of agreement, she signals her readiness. Haruka takes off, practically teleporting from one spot to another with his incredible speed, but the technique is still tricky to control, so he accidentally ends up falling off the side of the cliff. Luckily, his experience with dungeon falls has taught him to always be prepared, and he manages to land safely on his feet. Angelica soon catches up and peers over the edge of the cliff to check on him. However, she doesn't notice the slippery mushrooms near the edge and ends up falling as well. Haruka quickly catches her, relieved she's unharmed, but he's surprised at how heavy she is for someone he had assumed was skeletal. But on Angelica's side, she is utterly embarrassed as she finds herself cradled in Haruka's arms. Later that night, Haruka brings Angelica back to his house and heads straight to the bathroom to enjoy a well-deserved, relaxing soak in the tub. Then, with a teasing tone, he jokingly offers to let Angelica join him. But to his surprise, Angelica doesn't catch on that it's a joke and takes him up on the offer, and walks into the bathroom. Haruka is stunned, not just because Angelica actually wants to bathe with him, but because standing before him isn't the skeletal form he was used to, but a very hot blonde girl. Haruka then becomes completely flustered and stands up, forgetting he's not wearing a towel, and asks if she's really the Angelica he knows. Angelica confirms it, leaving Haruka speechless, so he quickly exits the tub and says they need to talk. Then we see the two settle down on Haruka's bed, where Haruka has a flood of questions. First, he asks if Angelica can talk now that she's human again. Angelica does have vocal cords, but she hasn't spoken in so long that she can't remember how to. Instead, she uses hand signs to explain what happened. She reveals that as the Dungeon Emperor, she had been reduced to nothing but a skeleton. The living armor she wore, however, was cursed to bind to its user's flesh, which technically restored her body. Then Haruka had given her a blessed bangle, which broke the armor's binding curse. Additionally, the necromancy jewel and the ring of fortune restored her life force and autonomy, and together these effects ultimately turned her back into a regular human. Haruka realizes that he's essentially responsible for restoring Angelica's humanity, and she explains that her help to him is her way of expressing gratitude. While Haruka appreciates her dedication, he feels guilty, wondering if he's unintentionally robbing her of her freedom. So he reassures her that she doesn't need to stay with him, and she is free to live her own life. However, Angelica adamantly refuses to leave, explaining that what she truly wants is to remain by his side. Haruka understands that Angelica doesn't want to feel alone, so he decides to stay with her a little longer. And to cheer her up, he offers to tell her a fun story. And from there, Haruka talked incessantly through the night about anything and everything that came to mind, while Angelica enjoyed every moment of his storytelling. The next morning, Haruka and Angelica head out, and Haruka suggests having a little training match. Angelica isn't against the idea, but is curious why he suddenly wants to fight. So Haruka explains that he's been working on a new skill, and wants to test how much he's improved over the past few days. Angelica then agrees to help him practice, and the two face off. Haruka already knows Angelica held back during their fight in the dungeon, but now that he's asked her to go all out, he expects her to be much faster. But Haruka is too determined to close the speed gap, so he plans to rely on his new gear shift skill. Then, as the match begins, Angelica charges forward, and Haruka deftly uses gear shift to dodge her opening strikes. By leaping back to create distance between them and readies himself into an attacking stance. He then rushes towards her and immediately tries to strike her with his staff, but she blocks it effortlessly and retaliates with a solid hit to his head. Haruka falls in defeat, and Angelica comes over to check if he's alright. But aside from the sting of his loss, he's fine. Though he couldn't outpace Angelica this time, he's getting better with the gear shift skill and feels confident he'll surpass her speed one day. For now, though, all the training has made him hungry, so Haruka suggests grabbing something to eat and asks if Angelica would like to join him. She nods, and he leads her to the river, where he demonstrates his lightning skill to catch fish. After gathering a decent haul, Haruka places the fish in a basket, and the two head home to prepare their meal. However, Haruka is tired of grilling fish every time, so he suggests they try making a hot pot for change. When they get home, Haruka heads to the kitchen to start preparing their meal, and Angelica, eager to help, offers her assistance. However, having never used a kitchen knife before, Angelica struggles, so Haruka steps behind her to guide her movements. Angelica seems to enjoy the experience too much, as it gives her the chance to spend some quality time with Haruka. Then once the meal is ready, it looks incredible, so the two sit down to eat together, and by the time they finish, Haruka is completely stuffed. But he notices that Angelica appears a little anxious, so he concernedly asks if something is on her mind. But Angelica is too embarrassed to speak, and instead she grabs his hand and leads him to the bedroom, asking him to sit beside her. Haruka still looks a bit perplexed at what is going on, but does as he is told and sits. Angelica then moves closer, positioning herself behind him. So that or this can only mean one of two things. But the second option is way too salacious for Angelica's personality. So Haruka correctly guesses she just wants to give him a normal massage, and Angelica confirms it, explaining that she wants to show her gratitude for everything he has done for her. Haruka tries to be nice, so he agrees to let her give him a massage. But it doesn't take long to realize that Angelica is terrible at it. Each touch results in bone-cracking sounds that definitely not the relaxing kind. But despite the discomfort, Haruka appreciates her effort and pretends that it feels great, praising her for her attempt. Still feeling like she hasn't done enough, Angelica asks if there's anything else Haruka wants, so he takes her offer to heart and suggests they step outside together. Under the night sky, the two sit on a bench and gaze at the stars. Angelica, feeling shy, keeps her distance, but Haruka notices and tells her there's no need to sit so far away, and gently he pats her head, though this only deepens her embarrassment, causing her to scoot even farther away. Struggling to express her feelings, Angelica tries to speak, but the words don't come out easily. Frustrated and ashamed, she turns away, but Haruka reassures her, telling her not to push herself too hard, and he acknowledges her efforts and encourages her to take her time, recognizing that Angelica needs an environment where she can improve her communication skills. Haruka realizes that dragging her into his loner lifestyle isn't the solution, so he suggests they head back to the city tomorrow. The next day, Haruka and Angelica are walking back to town together when, without warning, it starts to rain, so Haruka quickly grabs Angelica's hand and pulls her along as they dash through the rain, trying to avoid getting drenched. Once back in town, the two finally arrive, and the girls are overjoyed to see them again. However, their excitement turns to curiosity and teasing when they notice Haruka and Angelica holding hands. Realizing this, both Haruka and Angelica become flustered and immediately let go. But it's too late because the girls have already noticed. They then immediately swarm Angelica, bombarding her with endless questions about the time she spent with Haruka. Overwhelmed by the attention, Angelica finds herself at a loss, but class rep steps in, blowing her whistle to restore order, and then she formally welcomes Angelica back. Haruka then thanks class rep for watching over things and assures her he'll continue to rely on her. Then, while Angelica may have escaped the girls' probing questions, Haruka finds himself cornered by the guys, who demand all the juicy details of his date with Angelica. But Haruka flusteredly shouts at them until they finally back off. Just as things settle down, Angelica approaches Haruka, looking visibly nervous because she has something to say. Haruka then listens while she finally speaks and says a heartfelt thank you for everything he has done for her. And that makes Haruka is overwhelmed with pride. And since Haruka came to this world, he realizes that everyone is facing their own battles, and that means that they are all loners dealing with personal struggles, yet they have each other to rely on. And with this understanding, Haruka feels reassured that they will all be okay, and that means that he can continue his journey to master this world by himself. But this is the end of season 1 of this anime, so don't forget to like and subscribe to help me continue.